Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of viewers aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this content, hit that subscribe button. It really helps keep these long stories coming. Also, for even more police horror stories, check out my new channel. The link's in the description and pinned comment. I'd love it if you stop by and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. What time is it where you are and which city are you listening from tonight? Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into it. I parked 2 blocks down, engine idling low so the rumble wouldn't echo through Pitcher's Dive. The street lamps sputtered over cracked pavement, half the bulbs dead. I stepped out into humid air that tasted of rain and rot. Perfect cover for a man trying to convince half the bar that he belonged. My jacket was thrift store special, sleeves too long, collar flipped up to hide my neck. Underneath, my DEA badge sat taped against my ribs, weightless and absurd. I laced my boots tighter and checked the glow stick clipped to my belt, my only light if my flashlight died. I pushed through the door. The smell hit me before I saw the room. Stale tobacco, spilled IPA, and something coppery that made my stomach twist. Neon beer signs cast sickly greens and blues across battered tables. A busted jukebox rattled in the corner, playing muffled country until it sputtered to silence. The regulars clustered at the bar, backs hunched like they carried regrets heavier than the pint glasses. I swallowed the knot in my throat and wove through them, nodding at every pair of eyes without looking directly at any. At the far end sat Earl, the barkeep who'd vouch for me if I played the part right. He was a mountain of a man, arms blanketed in faded tattoos, one scar slicing through his forearm. I sidled onto a stool and ordered a whiskey, straight. The glass came back so heavy I thought it might crack under my grip. I lifted it to my lips, glanced at the tables. 2 men by the dartboard. One cleaned his fingernails with a butterfly knife. The other tapped a cigarette butt into a pool of stale beer. Nothing about this place reassured me. I set the glass down, voice low. "How's business tonight?" Earl didn't glance up. He ran a rag over the counter's scarred surface. "Quiet," he said. "Too quiet." He crouched, revealing a glimpse of a .45 tucked into his waistband. I nodded once, casually. He straightened, eyes flicking to the back corner where the bartender's second laugh rang hollow. "Here for Snake Eyes?" he asked. My chest tightened. That name carried weight. Jorge Marquez, called Snake Eyes because he never blinked. Word was he'd made a bad batch of meth, cut with rat poison so strong 6 kids nearly died. The other half died. I drained half my drink. "Yep." My accent slipped, a hint of California tourist instead of the southern drawl I'd practiced. Earl stiffened. "Watch your tongue," he muttered, but slid a shot of rye down the bar. I caught it before it tipped. "Thanks." I tossed it back, tasted oak and regret, steadied myself. Across the room, Snake Eyes stood, half a head taller than everyone else, shoulder-length black hair damp at the nape. His stare locked onto me, and I felt every bone in my body tense. He approached, boots thudding like warning bells. My radio lay buried under my flak vest. My partner was outside, eyes on the frosted windows. Backup in 5 minutes, they'd said. Plenty of time, unless I blew my cover. He slid onto the stool next to me, not touching but close enough I caught the faint whiff of his cologne, something dark, musky, like old leather and sweat. He ordered a beer in a clipped voice. When the glass arrived, he didn't lift it. He just stared at the amber swirl, as though counting the hours until sunrise. I kept my posture loose, not meeting his eyes. "I heard you're looking to move product," I said. My voice cracked. He keyed the glass with a calloused finger. "You heard wrong," he said. "I ain't moving anything tonight." He stared at me, and I realized the bar's noise had pooled into a single hush. Every patron watched. I felt naked, a lie in shotgun sight. I tipped my head toward Earl. "I hear you got supply coming in." Earl's rag froze mid-wipe. Snake eyes turned, glare sharp enough to cleave bone. "What supply?" he asked, sweet as syrup. My heart pounded. I reached into my pocket, fumbled for the matchstick I'd sharpened to hide a dose of bogus meth. Fingers slick. I tapped the counter. "Sources," I said. "They said you know where to get real product." Snake Eyes' lips twitched. An involuntary flash of amusement or contempt, I couldn't tell. He stood, extending a hand. "Follow me," he said. I wiped sweat from my palm. That grip would tell him everything. Outside, the night air pressed in, humid and heavy. I stumbled to my feet, blinking against the neon glow. Snake Eyes swung open a back door leading to an alley that smelled of wet cardboard. My partner's headset crackled. "Stand by." I forced a limp swagger, following him into the darkness where rats skittered in abandoned cardboard boxes. He stopped at a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Beyond it, headlights slanted through shipping containers. Pike's Industrial Park, late shift deserted except for our little rendezvous. He pressed his face against the metal, peered through a gap. "Got something for you," he hissed. I edged closer, peering past him. Crates stacked 2 stories high, each stamped with logos I didn't recognize. A forklift idled like a beast waiting to pounce. He turned to me, eyes catching the moonlight. "Tonight's the night," he murmured. His voice was a promise and a threat. I flicked the cap off a pen-sized recorder hidden in my palm. "I'm listening," I said. My voice sounded small. He smiled, slow, dangerous, and reached into his jacket. For a second, I misread the movement. I thought he'd draw a gun, but he pulled out a small package wrapped in plastic. "Proof," he said. "Then we talk business." He handed it to me. I took it, fingers grazing his. Cold seized my gut. I unwrapped it with trembling hands. 2 rocks of something white, pure enough to blind you. My pulse thundered. This was bigger than a simple bust. Disarray flickered in Snake Eyes' expression. I pocketed the sample, slipped the recorder beneath my sleeve. He nodded, backing into the shadows. "You know where to find me," he said. Then he melted into the black like a ghost. The night pressed close, the alley silent except for my ragged breathing. I pressed the sample to my heart, imagining all the ways this could go sideways. My partner's voice through the earpiece. "Ready on your mark." I gave a slow breath, fixed my gaze on the fence that separated me from 100 yards of open ground. I blinked, and on the other side of that fence I swore I saw a silhouette. Tall, unmoving, watching me through the chain links. I froze as the figure lifted a hand in a slow salute, and the hair on my neck prickled with something I hadn't felt since I first donned my badge. Raw, unfiltered dread. I stayed pressed against the chain-link fence longer than I'd ever stayed planted at a crime scene. The echo of that slow salute, a phantom gesture from across the barbed wire, chased me as I backed away, every twitch of my spine alive with static. My heartbeat pounded so loud I thought it might cheat and crack through skin. I'd prided myself on keeping cool. Tonight I felt marrow-deep chill. The alley's stink seemed to swell, rat droppings and rotting cardboard mingling into a single stench that clawed at my lungs. I flicked on the glow stick clipped to my belt, the greenish light pulsing like a dying ember. My partner, Diaz, slipped beside me, face half lit by the glow. His gaze darted from the fence to the sample in my fist. Jesus, Reyes had that waiting for you. I tucked the plastic-wrapped rocks into my jacket pocket, proof of Snake Eyes' next distribution, but also a brittle promise of chaos. Yeah, I said, my voice low, a rasp that betrayed my nerves. He called it Tonight's the Night. Diaz's lips thinned. Extraction in 2 minutes. You want to dip out now? I shook my head. Not yet. I needed more, not just the sample, but confirmation on how deep this ran. Snake Eyes didn't work alone, and in my experience, once a man names a date, there's a network waiting in the wings. We skirted the fence's perimeter, slipping over cracked concrete slabs, inching toward the street. My senses felt raw. The distant hiss of traffic, the scuff of Diaz's boots, the faint hum of a neon sign down the block. Everything drowned under the drum of blood in my ears. Tell me you recorded the whole thing, Diaz muttered, patting his vest. Audio's clean, I said, but I want visual. My fingers brushed the camera taped under my cap, the lens peeking through a gap in the brim. I needed footage of Reyes Sr., that shadow boss who'd ringlead more than just local deals. Diaz glanced toward the street. We gotta move, supervisors breathing down our necks. I slung my jacket over my shoulder, careful not to crush the evidence. One last look. We crept a little farther down the alley, hugging damp brick walls until we rounded the corner. The street outside Pitcher's Dive stretched empty under flickering bulbs. A row of shuttered storefronts, their plate glass windows fractured, held silhouettes of mannequins poised in silent screams. A stray cat slunk past, ears flattened, fur slick with grime. I took a step onto the street, balancing on slippery puddles, and glanced back at the dive. Through the grime-splattered windows, I thought I saw Snake Eyes' face appear, framed by the neon's sickly glow, half smirk, half threat. I blinked. The window was empty. My reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, and I realized how thin the veil between us had become. Diaz nudged me. Let's go. We melted into the shadow of an iron fire escape and slipped around the corner. My phone buzzed, a secure text from HQ, another assignment. Motel 312, Highway 49. Arms deal, potential human trafficking. It came with a new alias, Karen Blake. I read the dossier at a glance. 26, addicted to bourbon and restless nights, with a prison record for possession. Picture-shopped tattoos, synthetic backstory. I pressed the text away, feeling the weight of every identity strapped inside my skull. I turned to Diaz. Motel drop in an hour. You up? He exhaled tension. Always am, but you look like hell. I smirked, elevating the green glow stick so it sliced across my cheek. Welcome to life behind the mask. I drove us toward the outskirts, the cab's heater kicking up stale air that smelled like last night's regrets. Highway 49 was a black ribbon under a moonless sky, flanked by cornfields whispering in the wind. Every mile sent a tremor through me, cornstalks whipping by like a silent crowd urging me on. Diaz rode shotgun, adjusting his headset, eyes laser-focused on the feed from the bar camera he'd rigged to my jacket. Lines of data scrolled past. Timestamps, audio levels. I rattled breath when Snake Eyes nodded to the crate yard. Got the clip when Reyes Sr. handed you that package? He asked. I nodded. Yes, but no visual on him yet, just a silhouette. Diaz tapped his temple. We'll dig it out in the lab. Meanwhile, motel op, infiltration, wire it, record everything. I exhaled. Infiltration was routine. Cover, approach, collect intel. But the thought of a human trafficking sting made me swallow hard. We pulled into the neon halo of the Sleepwell Motel. Windows backlit in cheap indigo, each room a gaudy promise of rest that betrayed vacancy. A faded sign rattled overhead. Check-in 24/7, but the lobby's flickering fluorescence revealed more grime than welcome. I parked behind a rust-stained sedan, enough to hide Diaz's cruiser. He killed the engine. The world fell silent, save for my pulse. I unrolled my notepad, Karen Blake's alias, birth date, prison stint, a scribbled motive, looking to disappear. Diaz slid out. Mic on? Green light, I said. He clipped a parabolic mic to my shoulder. Front door in 2, 3, go. Diaz ducked behind the cruiser. I hoisted my backpack, the straps hugging my shoulders like harness ropes. The lobby door's glass swung open before my fist even reached it. The clerk, a gawky kid with acne and bad posture, glanced at me, then at the clock, then back. You, Miss Blake? I forced warmth into my voice. Yeah, checking in. His gaze flicked to the parole paperwork I'd shoved inside my bag, forged with precision. He tapped away at an ancient computer. Room 312, cash only. He slid me a keycard, cheap plastic clacking in my palm. I thanked him and stepped in. The hallway's carpet was threadbare, stained like coffee spills dried into tar. Room numbers leaned at odd angles, 309, 310, 312, strangely skipping 311 as if it had been erased. I slid the card through the slot. The lock clicked, the door gave way. Inside, a single overhead bulb buzzed. The air smelled of mildew and regret. I set my bag by the bed, unzipped it with economy, recorder in hand, camera lens peeking from the pocket. My reflection in the warped mirror didn't recognize me. Chapped lips, dark circles, hair plastered to my temple. I smoothed a hand over my cheek, swinging the rawness beneath the skin. A tap at the door. My heart sank. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. I swung it open. Gator Reyes's underling, slick-backed hair, zipper jacket zipped halfway, stood with 2 mugs steaming in plastic lids. Compliments of the boss, he said, pushing past me. I swallowed. Thanks. I motioned for him to sit. He perched on the edge of the bed, coffee sloshing. I handed him a quick nod. He leaned in. You got the goods? He tapped the mug, black coffee and code words. Yeah, but it's gonna cost. I sighed, crossing my arms. I got cash. I opened my wallet, fake bills in neat stacks. How much? He studied me, tone dry. 20,000. I blinked. That was for a semi-automatic shipment of handguns, not supposed to include grim add-ons. My breath caught. Every trafficking op I'd read about demanded hush money. 20 large for a cup of coffee wasn't in the script. I reached for the recorder, slipping it beneath the pillow. Let me check the bag. My hands trembled. Damn adrenaline. I reached back, pretending to search for my pack, and felt the recorder's weight. I fumbled, but he thought nothing of it. He sipped his coffee, eyes narrowing. You sure you're cut out for this, Karen? My chest tightened. I forced calm, voice even. I've gone through worse. I stood, planting feet on the carpet. Let's do the deal. He slid off the bed, the coffee slap-slopping in his hand. The zipper jacket glinted under the bulb. Follow me. My recorder was taped beneath my bra strap, a soft tube running down my spine. I swallowed, steadying my spine, stepping into a sliver of fear bigger than any alias. Behind me, the door closed with a soft click, and in that instant my quiet dread swelled into certainty. Whatever lay beyond those walls, it was nothing I could ever pretend to survive. As the hallway's bulb flickered again, I caught my reflection in the door's peephole lens. A haunted woman about to cross a line with no promise of rescue. I paused, breath hitching, and the world went still, save for that soft click of the lock turning from the other side. I swallowed the lump in my throat as the door's lock turned with a final, resonant click. Softer than a heartbeat, yet louder than anything I'd ever heard. The hallway light fractured through the peephole, casting my distorted reflection onto the warped carpet. I stood motionless, every nerve ending awake, as the knob began to twist from the other side. My eyes flicked to the recorder nestled beneath the pillow, its red light pulsing faintly, a metronome marking the seconds slipping away. I inhaled, tasting the stale cigarette smoke that clung to the upholstery, and fought the urge to choke. The kid who manned the front desk had said, "cash only," but he hadn't warned me about this moment, the point of no return, where preparation dissolves into raw instinct. The knob turned all the way, and the door swung inward on hinges that groaned like old bones. I forced my legs to remain rooted as Gator Reyes's underling stepped in, silhouette half illuminated by the buzzing bulb behind him. His coffee mug sloshed dark liquid onto the carpet, the spill spreading like an inky stain. He didn't speak. His eyes slid to the bed where I stood, then down to the recorder's soft glow. A slow grin cracked his face. "I thought you said you had the money," he said, voice flat. He let the words hover between us like a guillotine blade. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, recalling Karen Blake's backstory, her prison stint for petty theft, her father's funeral she never saw, the knife she'd taken from a drug dealer in self-defense. That fabricated pain felt hollow compared to the emptiness in his gaze. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I reached behind me, gripping the recorder's wire. My thumb hovered over the tiny switch that would cut off the mic. If I killed the feed now, Diaz would think the op had gone dark. He'd know instantly something was wrong. The man took a step forward, boots thunking on the warped floor. He knelt by the recorder, eyes narrowing. My pulse was deafening. I could hear it in my ears. He reached out, fingers brushing the device. I saw him register the faint imprint of my badge under my shirt. His grin vanished. He straightened, hefting the coffee mug like a weapon. I lifted my chin, voice steady though my body shook. "Here," I said, jerking my head toward the wallet straps visible through my translucent blouse. "On the dresser." He tilted his head, still gripped the recorder, as if weighing my lie. In one fluid motion, he tossed the mug to the floor. Glass shattered, coffee hissed against the carpet, and the racket chased away any chance of stealth. He stalked to the dresser, yanked open the top drawer. Bills tumbled out. Fake, cold paper that couldn't buy an honest meal. He looked back at me, a dark question in his eyes. How far would I go to maintain an illusion? I forced a breath, letting the warm sting fill my lungs. "Think of it as a deposit," I lied. "You hold it till the goods arrive." He snorted, tossing a handful of bills back at me. They slapped the bedspread, landing in a glittering mess. I picked one up, crisp, new, but stamped with a government seal that hadn't existed since Karen Blake died in federal custody. I slid it into my pocket. He circled me, every turn slow and deliberate. I saw the knife strapped to his ankle, muzzle of the blade peeking from beneath his pant leg. He paused, hand hovering above it. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about dollars anymore, it was a test of wills. "I can't hold deposit for ghosts," he said, voice low. "Where are the firearms?" I glanced toward the closet where the smuggled crates, stolen Czechoslovakian pistols meant for the syndicate, were waiting. My instruction was to photograph their serial numbers, record the transaction, then call it in. But the plan hadn't accounted for human weight pressing against the door, for second-guessing my own instincts. I swallowed, mind racing. "In the closet," I managed. "I can show you." He nodded once and pointed the knife at the door. "Lead the way." I walked to the closet as if on a stage, every step measured. The carpet fibers grabbed at my boots. The musty odor of damp clothes twisted my stomach. Inside, crates were stacked floor to ceiling, stamped with red lettering. My gloved hands hovered over the lid of the lowest crate. I kept my head down, heart hammering as I lifted it. The pistols lay on a mattress of packing straw, sleek, cold steel. I picked one up, squeezing the grip. It felt alive in my hand, a promise of power I didn't trust. He joined me at the closet opening, knife still poised, watching. I dialed my phone's camera app, no flash, and captured serial numbers. Each click echoed. I lowered the pistol and looked at him. "There," I whispered. "That's what you wanted." His gaze sharpened. He stepped forward, pressing the knife's hilt against my ribs. The metal sunk through cloth. I inhaled, feeling its cold kiss. "Now prove you're honest," he said. "Show me the rest." My breath stuttered. The hotel walls pressed in, the ceiling beat down, and I realized how thin the barrier between undercover and exposed had become. I could feel Diaz's presence in my ear, his last words crackling through, "Stay safe. Extraction in 15 minutes. But safety was a lie. In a room like this, every second spelled risk. He tightened his grip on the knife, sledging the hilt deeper. I gasped, chest constricting. The point wasn't to draw blood, it was to remind me of the consequences of deceit. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple. I forced myself to remain calm, keep my voice even. "Okay," I said, "I'll bring you everything." I stepped back, leaving the pistol in the crate, and reached for my hidden recorder switch. My thumb hovered for a moment. Dialogue, evidence, my ticket out, or my final undoing. He watched me, waiting. I flicked the switch off. Silence swallowed the room. In that void, I realized the motel walls held more secrets than I ever would. And as the door clicked behind me, shutting out the hallway light, I understood that tonight, the line between detective and prey had dissolved entirely, leaving only the raw, unmasked terror of survival. My chest tightened with a single, shallow breath. And in the darkness, I heard the softest whisper on the other side of the door. "Do you trust yourself?" I slipped out of the closet, holding my breath, every nerve crackling with the memory of that blade's cold kiss against my ribs. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting the hallway light to a sliver. I kept my eyes forward, though all I saw was darkness pressing against my vision. The underling stood by the dresser, knife still glinting in the bulb's sputter, his silhouette a living question. How far would I go to keep this charade alive? I swallowed and forced my legs to move. Each step was a negotiation. Heart racing, lungs tight, the world narrowed to the hiss of the blade and the metallic tang at my back. I reached the bed and knelt to retrieve my recorder from beneath the pillow. Its red light was gone. I'd killed the feed. My thumb shook as I toggled it back on, silent glare, capturing the moment he realized I'd lied. He mouthed a curse I couldn't hear, tightened his grip on the knife. The bulb overhead flickered, and the shadows on the chipped wallpaper pulsed. I stood, camera in hand, leveled it at his face. He leaned forward, lips curling, as though daring me to take the shot. I clicked the shutter. The bulb's reflection danced in his eyes, and I saw the raw hunger of someone accustomed to leverage. He lunged, no threat of steel, just a blur of motion aimed to knock the camera from my hand. I pivoted on my heel, dropping low, and the knife slashed the air inches from my wrist. instinct kicked in. I swept my arm forward, tripping him with the camera strap. He crashed onto the bed, groaning as the knife skittered across the floor. I lunged for the pistol I'd tucked into my belt. My fingers gripped cold metal and thumb flicked the safety. He scrambled, one hand reaching for the blade, the other clawing at the quilt. My vision tunneled. Only him, only me, only the weight of this weapon. He snarled, hoisted himself upright with the bedpost, and I realized too late that pulling a gun on an underling was a line I could never uncross. He flinched, eyes wide, knife forgotten in his lap. I lowered my voice. "Stay back." My words felt foreign in my own mouth. The pistol trembled in my grip. I was livid. Adrenaline and terror fused into a single wire in my chest. He froze, hands raised as if to surrender, knife clattering to the floor. I took 2 steps forward, heart hammering. The motel walls seemed to breathe, the overhead bulb threatening to die. My comm crackled. "Detective? Status?" Diaz's voice cut through the tension like a lifeline. I exhaled, throat raw. "I'm compromised. Need extraction now." My partner's reply was immediate. "Hold position. SWAT en route." He sounded calm, too calm. The underling spat. "You're one of them, aren't you?" Rage flamed in his eyes. "Undercover cop?" I nodded, raising the pistol slightly. "I'm the one who got your boss busted." My tongue burned with the lie. Reyes Sr. was still at large, and Snake Eyes hadn't been touched. But if this punk believed it, he'd keep still. He reeled back, a guttural curse on his lips. I lunged, pressing the barrel to his forehead. Every muscle in his body stiffened. For a heartbeat, I saw not a criminal, but a man fighting to survive my deception. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months. Guilt. The bulb flickered out. Darkness swallowed us. I found no comfort in the night, only the hush of unease. The echo of my own breathing felt too loud. I realized that at the edge of this blade and this gun, the roles I'd inhabited had bled together. Karen Blake dying in that closet, Rick Dalton at the bar, Marco Silva in the yard, all of them fractures of the same shattered mirror. A soft thud behind me, SWAT kicking in the door, shouts, boots on carpet, flashlights carving through the gloom. I lowered the gun and stepped back, hands raised. The underling slumped, nodding slowly, eyes haunted. As they cuffed him and secured the room, I watched through the haze of sweat and blood pooling on the carpet. My reflection in the shattered bulb cover stared back, hollow, unmasked, and utterly exposed. And in the silent pause before the chaos fully erupted, I heard my own whisper, louder than any siren. Which one of us will survive the night? I eased the pistol back into its holster as SWAT poured in, breaching the door with shields raised, voices clipped into megaphones. The underling collapsed to his knees, cuffed and breathing ragged, eyes wild as the room flooded with flashlights. I stepped back, chest heaving, sweat stinging my eyes. My heart kept hammering even as my hands grew steady. Diaz burst in behind the team leader, scanning for threats. He seized my arm, hauling me out of the trap of the motel room. I tried to catch my breath, the corridor's flickering lights churning. The hallway was alive with shouted orders, the clang of handcuffs, and the sharp scent of freshly drawn guns. I felt numb, every alias bleeding together in adrenaline and relief. "Detective?" Diaz hissed, guiding me toward the lobby. "You okay?" I nodded, swallowing past a lump in my throat. "Just get me out." They hustled us outside. The night air was cool, laced with exhaust fumes and rain that had begun to patter on the pavement. I blinked hard, as if I could shake off the smell of spilled coffee and fear. I spotted the cruiser's spotlight carving circles in the storm. A medic hovered near an ambulance, checking the underling's pulse. The SWAT sergeant approached, face grim. "We got evidence secure. You want to give your statement now?" I rubbed my temple, vision swimming. I realized I still wore Karen Blake's laminated parole card around my neck. I ripped it off and tossed it into a rain puddle. It floated before sinking. I took a step back, letting the rain wash away the last of that persona. "Not yet," I managed. "I need a minute." Diaz slung an arm around my shoulders, steadying me. "We've got the motel covered. Let's head back to HQ, get this sample processed, then brief the raid on Snake Eye's yard." My throat constricted. "Ghost Yard," I corrected. "Detroit." He gave me a sharp look. "Yeah, extraction at 0400. My stomach flipped. The third op loomed. Warehouse district at the edge of town. Crates full of people. Cages shoved between containers. It was the tip of a trafficking ring that had swallowed half a dozen missing persons reports. And I'd lied about busting Reyes Sr. The network was still out there, hungry, and I was the only thing standing between the ghosts in those crates and the dark night. Diaz guided me to the passenger door. I sank into the seat, letting the seatbelt clamp me down. The rain blurred the streetlights into burning halos. He shut the door, climbed in, and flicked on the windshield wipers. They squealed across the glass, echoing the echo still thundering in my skull. He reached across, tapping my vest where my real badge was pinned. "You did good tonight. You got them on camera, and the sample's en route to the lab. We'll nail Snake Eyes for distribution, and we've got leads on Reyes Sr.'s front man. But the yard's your show." I stared through the rain-streaked window at the motel's neon sign, its letters sputtering. "Sleep well." A cruel joke. I exhaled, cool air filling my lungs. "I'm ready," I said softly. The cruiser slid into traffic, tires hissing on wet asphalt. We passed shuttered shops and empty highways until the city's industrial spine rose ahead. Rows of corrugated steel, broken windows staring like black eyes. The ghost yard lay beyond a chain-link fence, the same park where I'd first checked in as Marco Silva. Now, in my own skin, badge on display, I felt the weight of every wiretap, every false name, and every life I'd stolen to get this close. Diaz cut the engine, and silence flooded the cab. The rain hummed on the roof, a lullaby for the damned. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. His face was illuminated by the street lamps reflected in the wet glass, determination carved in the carry of his jaw. He nodded once. Time. I climbed out, boots squelching in waterlogged gravel. The yard's gates yawned open, dark as sin. Behind them, the crates waited. Somewhere in the maze of containers, voices and screams were locked away. I squared my shoulders, stepping into the ghostly grid of metal giants. My hand hovered over my holster, numbers of my real badge blurred in the rain on my chest. The night swallowed me, and every step rang in my ears. Purpose, dread, confession. I crossed the threshold into the ghost yard, tasting rain and rust, hearing faint echoes of those held within. My breath came shallow, matching the patter of water on steel roofs. And though I'd shed every mask to get here, I felt naked. No alias left to hide behind. I paused at the first row of crates, the padlocks glinting dully. My recorder was in my pocket, the wet fabric pressed against my leg. My reflection in the shiny metal told me everything. The nights I'd lived, the lines I'd crossed, the truths I'd abandoned. I slid a lock off the first crate. The click sounded impossibly loud, like a verdict. The lid creaked upward, and the world constricted to the darkness inside. A scream tore free, raw and human, and I froze, breath caught. Rain flattened against the crate's underside like 1,000 tiny hammers. I froze, every muscle locked, as the scream ripped into the night, half agonized plea, half plea for salvation. The crate's interior was a shallow chamber of shadows. My boots splashed in a puddle that smelled of fear and stale air. I swallowed, raising my flashlight. The beam flickered and sputtered against the metal walls, then steadied on a single pair of eyes, wide, desperate, rimmed in red. I crouched, careful not to spook whoever lay inside. A woman's voice, raw and ragged. "Detective?" she said, though her lips barely moved. "Please." She curled against the far corner, arms wrapped around knees. The crate door had no hinges, just a heavy lid that rattled against damp grooves. I pressed my palm to the latch and willed the metal to budge. It creaked, releasing the last barrier between her and the night. She stumbled out, body trembling so violently the rain's drumming couldn't drown it out. Her clothes were soaked, plastered to her skin, her hair matted with grime. I swept my jacket around her shoulders, the fabric heavy with water and a scent that spoke of too many nights in confinement. She pressed her face into my chest, silent tears soaking through my badge. "Thank you," she whispered, voice raw as gravel. They said I'd earn money, food, but..." Her words trailed off, the weight of what she'd endured too great for full speech. I guided her out of the crate yard's maze, every step a negotiation between safety and urgency. My other hand pressed the radio mic. Subject rescued. 1 victim out. Repeat, 1 victim secured. Extraction point Delta. Static hissed back. Copy that. ETA 3 minutes. I shifted her into the passenger seat of my unmarked cruiser, seatbelt buckling around her. The dashboard light glowed pale in the rain-slick night. I retrieved a blanket from the trunk, wrapping it around her trembling form. She gazed at me through the windshield, eyes pooling trust and terror, and I felt the fractures in my soul realign around something true. Saving lives, not stealing them. My comm crackled. "All units, move in. Secure remaining crates. Do not engage unless fired upon. Victims in crates may attempt escape." The SWAT SUV rolled past, lights carving through the dark yard. I sat behind the wheel, engine purring, heart still hammering from the crate's confines. Behind us, more shrieks cut through steel corridors. I watched the yard's floodlights flicker on, one by one illuminating rows of locked steel coffins. Every crate held a story, and every story demanded rescue. I turned to the woman beside me. Her frame quivered, but she managed a small nod. Through her eyes, I saw the difference between survivor and victim. I eased the car forward, tires hissing on gravel as we cleared the gate. The woman pressed a trembling hand to the glass, watching teammates in tactical gear fan out, flipping crate lids like tombstones. I radioed in her condition, then flicked on the heater to chase off the cold. "Detective," she said softly, voice steadier than I expected. "What about the others?" I inhaled, a breath that expelled months of deceit, lies, and borrowed faces. "We're coming for them, everyone." The cruiser swerved onto the service road, pooling in headlights that split the dark. The woman leaned back, exhaustion claiming her, eyelids fluttering as relief soaked in. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other unconsciously brushing the edge of my badge under the blanket. The rain eased to a whisper, as though the yard itself exhaled. I glanced at the road ahead, 2 miles to the county hospital, then back to the yard for the final crates. 7 operations in one night, 3 identities shredded, and a city's worth of terror laid bare. I tapped the mic. "Detective James on Channel 1. I need a secured corridor through all intersections. Medical first, then extraction," Static answered. "Understood. All units comply." I exhaled, tension easing from my shoulders. The woman beside me slept, ravaged but alive. For a fleeting moment, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Clarity, not a mask, not a role, just a single undeniable purpose. Ahead, the hospital lights glowed, a lighthouse for the broken. And behind me, the ghost yard's metal maw waited, crates still filled with captive souls. I pressed my foot down, tires cutting through puddles. The night wasn't over. But as the cruiser roared toward the hospital, I realized the final section loomed, the point where every lie fell away and only truth remained. The hospital's doors slid open with a hiss that smelled of antiseptic and tired feet. I guided her out of the cruiser, blanket heavy around her shoulders, and into the whirl of stretchers and fluorescent light. The medical team moved with calm efficiency, checking vitals, administering IVs, murmuring assurances meant more for them than for her. I lingered at her side, watching the bruises beneath her arms, the way her spine curved from endless confinement. I thought of all the identities I'd worn just to get here. Rick Dalton's borrowed bravado, Karen Blake's fractured vulnerability, Marco Silva's steely resolve. None of them mattered now. Only this moment did. A nurse caught my eye and nodded, taking the woman from me to a private wing. I stepped back, letting the doors swoosh closed behind her. The world beyond those doors felt distant. Reports, paperwork, debriefings. But I needed one last look at the woman's face illuminated through the frosted glass. She pressed her palm against it from the inside. I mirrored the gesture on the outside until our fingertips almost touched. Then her eyes fluttered shut, and the light cut out. The door latched, a quiet click that felt like punctuation. I turned, shoulders shaking as the weight of the night finally settled on me. The rain had stopped, and outside, the world looked washed clean. The pavement glistened under the streetlights, mirroring my own reflections. The uniformed detective I'd returned to. The man who'd survived lies and deception to save someone's life. I straightened my jacket, pressed my real badge against my chest, letting its metal cool the tremor in my palm. My radio snapped me back. "Detective, are you en route back to the ghost yard for the final clearance?" Diaz's voice crackled with static. I exhaled, looking into the hospital's dark windows. "Yes," I replied. "I'm heading back. Let's finish this." I climbed into the cruiser, sliding behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, and the world narrowed to the road ahead. The entrance to the ghost yard loomed not far off, an unmarked turn beneath a cracked sign that read, "Industrial Access." The fence's razor wire glinted in the drifting fog, and beyond it lie rows of sealed metal coffins waiting for the last act of redemption. I drove through the gate again, boots crunching on gravel as I stepped out. The SWAT lights had dimmed to a steady flash, and the yard was quieter now. 2 crates left. The floodlights shone through parted clouds, casting long shadows that twisted like specters across steel. I reached the first of the 2 remaining crates, heart hammering with every step. The padlock's click echoed in the empty yard, like a judge's gavel slamming down. I lifted the lid, shoving it back until it rattled against the frame. Inside lay a young man, eyes closed, skin pale but eyes fluttering at the edge of consciousness. He coughed as I hauled him out, pressing him against my chest as the night air stripped away the fog in his lungs. He looked at me, bewildered. His name, I would learn later, was Amir, a runaway lured by promises of work that turned to chains. I laid him gently on the ground, checked his pulse, meeting his unfocused gaze. "You're safe now," I murmured. I scooped him up and carried him toward the extraction point, the final crate looming like a tomb ahead. The yard felt empty. less haunted now that most souls were free. My boots made no sound, but for the soft thud against the earth, each step marking the closing of a circle I'd led. I reached the last crate, knelt, and pressed my palm to the cold steel. The padlock slid open with a weighted clink. This was it, the final lid between captive and free. I hesitated, caught between relief and dread. The truth of what lay beyond had felt too real when I bent over that first crate. The rawness of human suffering laid bare. Could I handle it again? I tightened my grip on the lid and lifted. Inside, huddled in trembling silence, was a teenage girl, no more than 17. Her eyes were wide, stricken with the knowledge that hope had abandoned her. She curled into herself, knees to chest, paint peeling off the crate walls behind her like tombstone lettering. "Detective?" she rasped, voice brittle. "Is it over?" I swallowed, vision blurred by something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since the night began. A choked-up relief, a sorrow deeper than any undercover role. I knelt before her, tugged her into an embrace. The world shrank to her heartbeat against my chest. For a moment I saw not a criminal's prey, but a child I'd once been trying to outrun in the mirror. "It's over," I said, voice breaking. "You're free." Behind me, the wind whispered through the fence, carrying echoes of tonight's confessions. Identities shed like second skins, lies cut away by each rescue, the detective's soul worn bare by the faces he'd saved. I pressed my badge against her back, a promise that this was no masquerade. The steel grid around us felt less like a trap and more like a tomb being emptied. I rose, guiding her toward the exit. The yard's gate swung open, and I led her into the warming glow of the cruiser's headlights. She climbed in, shivering but alive, and I slammed the door behind her. I sat in the driver's seat, hand on the wheel, chest aching with raw emotion. Tires hissed as I drove away, leaving the ghost yard to gather its own shadows. As the hospital's lights blinked on the horizon again, I realized something couldn't be undone. The houses I'd lived in, the faces I'd worn, the betrayals I'd committed, all in the name of justice. They'd changed me. I reached over, tapping the girl's shoulder. She looked up, eyes searching mine for reassurance. I forced a small smile. "You'll be safe now," I said. But as we sped toward the light, the one that promised healing, I felt the final mask slip away. Beneath every alias lay a man who'd lied, stolen lives, and confronted death to save others. And in the silent space between breath and heartbeat, I understood the darkest truth of this night. Can a soul rebuilt from lies ever stand whole in the daylight? I slipped through the door of Al's lounge just after midnight. The bells jangle, swallowed by a whirl of stale laughter and the hum of a flickering neon sign. My cover name was Mac, an out-of-luck gambler with a haunted look in his eyes, and I'd spent 4 hours in the cruiser rehearsing the details, where I'd lost my last $10, the make of my beat-up jeans, the exact way my shoulders slumped when I couldn't cover my tab. I'd memorized Liza DeMarco's mugshot until every pore of her face was burned into the back of my eyelids. But nothing, not the careful accent, not the fake crinkle of my forehead, could prepare me for the weight of that first breath inside the joint. A mixture of spilled whiskey, cheap perfume, and a tension so thick it tasted like metal on my tongue. I found a stool in the corner, angled just right to catch every twitch of the bartender's eye. He was a grizzled guy who'd seen it all, silver in his beard, a permanent scowl carving lines at the sides of his mouth. I nodded once and slid a $10 bill across the bar. His eyes flicked over me, sizing up Mac's story. Down on his luck, sleeping in his truck, barely scraping by. He poured my drink, something amber and burning, without a word. Liza came in at 12:15. She moved like she owned the shadows. Shoulders squared, heels clicking on cracked tile. Everything about her screamed danger in slow, deliberate bursts. The leather jacket draped over her forearms, the way she cupped a tumbler of neat bourbon like it held all her secrets. My heart kicked, but I eased into my practice slump and offered a half smile. "Mind if I join?" She paused, eyes narrowing just long enough for me to doubt my cover. I caught the tremble in my hand before I could hide it, my left palm slick with sweat. She hesitated, then slid over. We traded safe bets. Bad night for cards. Heard the highway patrol's been sniffing around. All while, I cradled my drink as if it were life itself. Under the table, my wired mic drank in her voice and the low buzz of the bar's PA. She leaned closer, and I caught the acrid tang of her perfume, cheap jasmine, but sharp enough to jump-start my nerve endings. "You look like you could use a win, Mac," she said, voice low, something like amusement hiding behind dark lashes. I let my fake accent drape lazily over my words. "Unless you're here to lend someone else luck." That was my opening. I'd come armed with fake remorse and a loose handle on sympathy. She slid a small glassine bag across the table, pistachio green pellets glinting under the bar's dim light. Before I could reach for my phone to signal our team, my ear throbbed. Static. A brief, stabbing crackle that flared and died. The bartender stiffened, eyes shifting toward us. She clenched her jaw, voice clipped. "You ever hear of the Midnight Serpents?" "No," I lied, breath catching. "They don't like loose ends," she whispered, tracing a finger along the edge of the bag. "Lose your accent around them, and you'll pay for it." I swallowed hard. I'd heard the Serpents ran the back alley arms trade. Guns, cash, corrupt cops for hire. But I'd never seen them deal in bodies for sport, until this job. My wire spun out static again, longer this time, humming over my cheek. Every head in the joint snapped toward the bar's speakers, their breath hitched. I felt Liza stiffen, eyes flicking toward the entrance. Time collapsed. She slid off her stool and flicked her wrist. A slim figure materialized behind her. A kid no older than 17, skin too pale, hoodie drawn tight. He balanced a gun in his hand. A380. Modifications welded on that I couldn't identify in the neon-shifted gloom. I realized he was my backup. Supposed to be Ferguson and Lee until the hood fell back. His face was smooth, too young, and he wore her eyes. Same dark swirl, same calculating glint. My pulse ricocheted. "Liza?" I croaked. She shook her head, lips pressed into a thin line. "No more lies," she said, turning away. "Not tonight." I dove for the table, sending chips skittering like shattered teeth. Chairs scraped as bodies pivoted. I heard a gun click, faint, deliberate, a prelude to pain. My hands found my holster, but my cover belt was empty. I'd traded a real weapon for this sleight-of-hand prop. The boy, her reflection, stepped forward. "You should have stayed, Mac," he said, voice flat. "Now you're just Daniel." Something in the air snapped, like a balloon popping underwater. I caught a flash of movement at the door, a steel barrel aimed at me from the shoulders of a man I never saw enter. The bartender's face hardened, hand sliding toward his own concealed piece. A single shot cracked the air. My ear rang, but I heard her scream, the real Liza standing by the back exit, eyes wide as the world tilted. I plunged to the floor, stomach sliding on spilled whiskey. My wire tore free, spinning a line of static that felt like ice at the base of my skull. I forced my lungs to work, tasting the copper tang of fear. The boy raised his gun, voice calm. Say your prayers, detective. I curled into myself, every instinct screaming to bolt. Around me, bodies froze, chairs teetered. A second shot cracked. I felt the bulge of a round graze my shoulder, warm and burning, and I clenched my teeth to keep from crying out. The last thing I saw was her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Liza's face doubled, then tripled, ghosted across broken glass, mouth moving but no sound. And then everything went black. I came to on the cool tile, hands bound with zip ties, every sense alive. My wire lay twisted at my side, feeding silence into my ear. Above me, that same neon sign sputtered. I lifted my head enough to see the boy standing over me, brandishing my badge like a jagged promise. He whispered, and the words crushed me. "You're in too deep, Dan." And somewhere in the dark, the bartender's silhouette melted into the wall, leaving me alone with my pain, and the realization that in blending in, I'd become the thing I hunted. A soft breath tickled my ear. Someone, or something, was close. I woke to the clatter of boots on concrete, barely audible over the pounding in my skull. The warehouse's overhead bulbs had snapped back to life, each one humming like a swarm of angry insects. My wrists burned where the zip ties bit into my skin, and every breath tasted like rust and mildew. I tried to push myself up, but the chains at my ankles pulled me back, heavy links echoing through the cavernous space. Shadows danced along the walls. Pallet racks stacked 10 feet high, casting skeletal shapes that flickered in the harsh light. My head lolled to the side, and I realized I'd been bound to a metal post at the center of the floor. The same post where, just hours ago, I'd planted surveillance bugs, convinced I was in control. Now I stared at my own recorder, smashed beneath a crate, static seeping from its shredded casing. Footsteps approached, slow, measured, like someone marking their territory. I strained to listen, each breath a labor, trying to place the gate. Too even for a warehouse worker, too deliberate for a fleeing suspect. My chest tightened as the silhouette emerged. Liza DeMarco, mask off. Jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up. Blood flecked the cuffs of her shirt. Dark stains I didn't want to identify. She paused a few feet away, hands resting on her hips. Her eyes, once a shade of cold indigo, were now a storm of regret and something darker, appraisal. She knelt, leaning so her face hovered at my eye level. My skin crawled at the proximity, at the faint rasp of her breath. "You ever feel like every identity you take is another scar?" she asked, voice low, almost a whisper. There was no greeting, no framing of threats, just that question, as if she'd known me longer than any partner ever did. I swallowed, jaw aching. My voice cracked, a rasp like dry leaves. I wanted to lie to slip back into Detective Marley, but the chains and the blood smeared on her sleeve made every facade crumble. She ran a finger along the length of the chain linking my ankle to that post. "Eli would have laughed at this," she said, referring to the ISP cover I'd used in Motel 42. "Mac would have cursed like a sailor." Her tone softened, but there was a tremor in her hand. Betrayal or fear, I couldn't tell. I wanted to ask why she'd brought me here, why she'd shot me in the bar, abducted me from that melting corridor, and why she kept me alive now. But the words lodged in my throat, tangled in my own guilt. She stood up, pacing a careful circle. Every click of her boots was a reminder of the distance between us, of how far I'd fallen into this game. She paused behind me, and I felt her shadow swallow mine. "You weren't just undercover, Daniel," she said, voice low enough that I felt it in my chest. "You were all in, every lie you told, every mask you wore, It became the truth. A cold trickle ran down my spine. I'd spent years convincing people I was someone else, infiltrating gangs, posing as addicts, sounding like a washed-up trucker. I'd buried my own reflection beneath those layers. And now, I sat bound in a stranger's lair, stripped of every title I'd fought for. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. Her fingers were warm, surprisingly so, against my clammy skin. "Do you even know who you are anymore?" Her words cut deeper than any bullet. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the warehouse walls, a distant growl that shook the rafters. Liza glanced upward, silhouette framed by the high window's pale light. Rain dripped through a crack in the roof, each drop a staccato beat on the metal floor. She turned back to me, eyes glinting with unshed tears or perhaps something sterner, resolution. "I'm sorry it had to go this far," she whispered, and I believed her. There was no hatred in her tone, only sorrow. Then the lights flickered, plunging us both into brief darkness. In that instant, I heard the soft click of a bolt turning somewhere behind me. A single drop of water fell on my cheek, cool, insistent. In the half-light, Liza's face blurred, ghost-like. When the bulbs buzzed back on, she was gone. No footprints, no sign of struggle, just the echo of her boots fading into the deeper shadows. I strained against the chains, every muscle screaming, but they held. The distant thunder rolled again, louder this time, and rain began to pool at the warehouse gates. In the growing echoes, I caught movement, a figure stepping into the flicker of a broken bulb. Their eyes were too familiar, too reflective. "Detective?" a voice called, soft but loaded with dread. I froze, breath caught on a whisper. I pushed myself up on shaking arms, the metal cuffs biting into my wrists as the warehouse's buzzing lights settled into a grim, humming wakefulness. My vision swam as I blinked against the glare. Crisscross shadows from broken skylights painted the concrete in fractured patterns, like shattered promises strewn across the floor. Every inhale burned with the acrid scent of rust and machine oil, the air thick enough to taste it on my tongue. I forced my legs to move, each shift of weight setting chains rattling against my ankles, a hollow percussion in the cavernous space. I hadn't seen her since the rain-slicked corridor where her silhouette faded into the darkness. Now I was alone, my recorder flattened beneath a crate, my badge clipped upside down to my belt, and my service weapon long since lost to Mac's sleight of hand. I rubbed at the raw skin on my wrists, trying to ignore the phantom pulse of pain that lanced through me with every breath. Footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper in the warehouse, slow and deliberate, calculated. My pulse quickened as I realized I wasn't abandoned. Someone was coming. I leaned back against the post, head thumping, and tried to steady my breathing. The chain with my ankle links groaned as I shifted, sliding a few inches toward the open expanse of the floor. The footsteps grew nearer, echoing off stacked pallets and towering shelves of unmarked crates. I braced myself for a confrontation, ready to feign unconsciousness or pitch into a desperate gambit. The figure appeared at the edge of a shifting shaft of light. A man in a charcoal trench coat, face hidden beneath a brimmed hat. His stride was sure, shoulders squared, as if he'd walked this path 1,000 times before. "Detective Marley," he said, voice low and gravelly, carrying an accent I couldn't place. Part Eastern European, part something darker. He paused a few feet away, tipping his head with a gesture of acknowledgement. "You're far from home." I swallowed, trying to clear the dryness from my throat. "Who are you?" I rasped, though I guessed. The way he moved, the authority in his stance. This was the handler, the one who'd orchestrated the arms deals, The false leads, the endless masquerade. He studied me for a long moment. Then he pulled a slim, leather-bound notebook from his coat, flipping it open. Under the flickering light, I could just make out handwritten notes. My cover names, case dates, even the motel room numbers. "They call me Carol," he said, closing the book with a soft snap. "But you can call me the director." I frowned at the moniker, but my mind was racing. How many operations had he watched from behind his notes? How many times had he gambled with my life for intel I never received? He stepped closer. "Your team thinks you're missing," he continued, voice eerily calm. "But I knew better. I knew you'd come here looking for answers. And you brought me here to—" I let the question trail, letting the echo fill the space. "To show you the truth," he replied, glancing at the high ceiling as if expecting it to crumble. "Truths you've buried deep under your aliases, under your lies." He reached into his coat, producing a small satchel. He untied the strings and dumped its contents onto the floor. Dozens of tiny USB drives, each one labeled in block letters: Mac, Frank, Eli, Sheriff, Profiler. Each label was crossed out in red ink. My heart sank as I realized he'd collected the remnants of every identity I'd ever worn. "They're all here," he said quietly, stepping back. "Except one." He flicked his gaze toward me, and I felt my spine freeze. "What did you name yourself before you signed up? Before you put on the badge?" I didn't answer. My mind scrambled for the earliest memory of my undercover work. The first face I'd worn. The first lie I'd lived. He smiled, a sad curve of his lips. "Exactly." I lurched forward, intent to grab the nearest drive, anything to prove I still held a piece of control. But the chains held fast. He crossed a boot over my hand, pinning it to the gritty floor. The drive slid toward me, just out of reach. "Here," he said, nudging it with his toe. It wobbled, then stopped, etched with the single word, almost faded. "Marley." "Your real name," he said, "the only one that matters." He leaned in until his hat brushed mine. "Everything else is just noise." A distant rumble of thunder shook the rafters, and the lights flickered. My chest tightened, fear and rage tangling into one. I stared at the drive, then at him, voice thick. "Why am I here?" He straightened, stepping back into the gloom. His silhouette blurred, and I realized I hadn't noticed the others gathering behind him, faces half hidden, watching. Fellow operatives, or victims of his schemes, ghosts of the undercover lives I'd pieced together. He lifted a hand in a slow, final wave. "To make you remember," he said, "and to remind you, you're never off the record." The lights gave one final flicker, plunging us into darkness. In the hush, I heard a soft click, the post's chain releasing. A breath, too quiet to be mine. Then the warehouse door groaned open. A sliver of pale moonlight slicing across the floor. And a whisper drifted from the shadows. "Detective, they're waiting." I forced my weight against the post until the loose link of the chain hit its limit, the metal biting into my skin with every tremor of movement. My lungs screamed for air, but I kept at it, rocking back and forth, until the bolt at my ankle snapped free with a final, defiant clang that echoed off the warehouse walls like a starting gun. Every nerve ending lit up in a surge of adrenaline as I stumbled upright. Shoulders slumped from exhaustion, but legs determined. The director and his shadowed cohort melted back into the deeper gloom, faces obscured by the towering stacks of crates. Somewhere behind me I heard the soft scuff of boots. Too many, moving in unison. Pressed my back to the post, scanning the vast expanse of concrete and steel shelving for any sign of an exit. The main bay doors gleamed under a strip of moonlight, but I knew better than to sprint. I had no ammo, no comms, and the aisles between the pallets were festooned with tripwires and motion sensors wired to those blinking cameras. Any reckless dash would spark alarms I couldn't outrun. I crouched low, my suit jacket still unbuttoned from the night's chaos, pockets empty except for crumpled receipts and the memory of every false identity I'd shed. A lone, fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead, its sputter matching my heartbeat. I tested my wrists, flexing each finger, willing the pain to sharpen my senses. My recorder lay just out of reach beneath a half-open crate. I spared a glance, but shied away from risking another snag. Footsteps converged from two directions, the director's men flanking me like wolves closing in on injured prey. I had mere seconds to choose, fight blind and unarmed, or slip deeper into the maze and hope they led me somewhere I could improvise. My instinct, honed over 6 years of undercover work, shouted, "Run," so I took it. I darted into the nearest aisle, boots pounding the cracked concrete, crates overhead creaking ominously. My breath came in ragged bursts, each exhale a cloud of defeat and determination. Behind me, shouts ricocheted. One voice barked orders, another cursed in a guttural accent I'd never hear without flinching again. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I sprinted past pallets labeled with shipping barcodes I couldn't read, through a tangle of metal racks, and nearly crashed into a maintenance cart piled high with coils of wire. I slammed into the cart, sending its contents sprawling. Sparks flew as cable ends scraped the floor. My pursuers' footsteps faltered, just for a heartbeat, before they closed in again. I pried a length of wire from the coil, twisted the end around my fist, and flipped the cart over toward the aisle's mouth. It tipped with a roar, wires cascading like a steel net. One man lunged into it, snagged, and went down in a flurry of curses and tangled limbs. I seized my moment, vaulting over his sprawled form, landing in the shadow of an enormous ventilation duct. A narrow crawl space yawned at the base of the duct, its grate ajar from some previous inspection. I jammed my fingers into the gap and hauled myself forward, boots scraping the metal interior, lungs burning as I wriggled inside. The crate maze faded behind me, replaced by the hollow resonance of ductwork humming with the vibrations of heavy machinery. I paused, ear pressed to the grill, listening. Somewhere above, maybe a floor up, voices murmured, the low rumble of heavy boots. I inched forward, limbs slick with sweat. Every itch of movement a reminder of how exposed I still was. The duct bent sharply to the left, then right, funneling me toward dim, amber-lit corridors I'd never seen on the warehouse blueprints. I emerged into a small control room. Dusty monitors lined the walls, each screen feeding live black and white footage from cameras in the loading bays, the bar, the motel corridor, the alley. My face flickered across one screen, eyes wild, sweat on my brow, the faint trickle of blood at my temple. I recognized the layout. It was the nerve center for this entire operation. If I could seize one console, I might loop their cameras long enough to slip out the service door on the far side. I crept forward, every step measured, muscles coiled like springs. My wire loop still groaned at my boot, but the grate had left it behind in the duct. I reached the nearest desk, hands trembling as I flipped one monitor on. Lines of code scrolled under green text, a control interface for the alarm grid and cameras. I hesitated only a moment before yanking at the keyboard. Override sequence, loop feeds, disable external calls. The screens flickered, and for the first time all night I felt a shred of control. But as the images settled into repetitive loops, empty aisles, a still shipping crate, a single spinning fan, I heard it, the soft click of the service door latch being released. My breath froze. I glanced at the door's CCTV feed. A figure stepped into the frame. Tall, with a distinctive leather jacket draped over one arm. Her hair, dark and dripping as if she'd just walked through rain, clung to her temples. Liza. She didn't raise a gun. She laid the jacket over a chair, then beckoned to someone behind her. A shadow moved into view. A silhouette I knew too well. The last monitor flickered again, and my own reflection appeared, wide-eyed and alone at the console. I reached out as if to touch it, but my fingers went through cold glass. Behind me, the service door opened fully. Light spilled in, haloed around Liza's form. She stepped forward, voice soft but impossible to ignore. "If you disable that, there's no turning back." My hand hovered over the keys. Every identity I'd worn, Mac, Frank, Eli, screamed in my mind, urging me to run. But only one name mattered now, me. Daniel Marley. I exhaled, heart hammering against my ribs. My fingers closed around the central override switch, and then a whisper crawled from the dark corner of the room, so soft I questioned if I'd imagined it. "Detective, remember who you serve." I edged past the service door just as it clicked shut behind Liza, heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst right through my ribs. Beyond the door lay a narrow maintenance corridor, pipes overhead, walls slick with condensation, the distant drip of water echoing like a slow metronome. I kept my pistol grip loose on the empty belt holster at my hip, every muscle coiled for flight. Liza stood in the glare, her silhouette framed by the flickering hallway light. She pressed a finger to her lips, lips parted in a silent warning. "Move," she whispered, voice low and urgent. There was no trust in her eyes, only a hard clarity that cut sharper than any blade. Behind her, I saw the director's men pressing against the glass of the control room, shadows rippling across the monitors as they realized I'd severed their eyes. I didn't hesitate. I slipped past her, throat tight, and ducked into the corridor's gloom. My ankles, stiff from chains and duct metal, protested with every step, but I forced the pain down and moved as quickly as the narrow passage allowed. Wet footprints marred the floor, evidence of someone else's midnight passage. I followed them, instinct guiding me deeper into the warehouse's underbelly. The corridor forked into two routes. One descended in steep concrete steps, the other arched downward through a tangle of ventilation grates. The steps looked promising, solid, direct, but the echoing shouts from above made me think twice. The grate tunnel, though claustrophobic, offered concealment. I turned without looking back, pried at the latch of the nearest grate, and slid inside, pulling it closed just as a booted foot thundered past the opening. Inside the duct, my breath came in white puffs, my body cramped in the tight metal tube. The occasional drip of water pattered above, sending tremors through the steel. I paused, listening. Distant shouting, boots on concrete, and the unmistakable hiss of a radio call. Voices I recognized from the precinct, but not the tone. They were calling my name, urgent and crackling. "Marley, where are you? Control room breach." I pressed forward, scraping my palms along the duct's inner seam. A scrawl of grease paint on the wall caught my eye. An arrow pointing upward, accompanied by a hastily scrawled word, "Exit." My heart lurched with relief. I followed the arrows, weaving past jumble of old wires and broken conduit, each footstep a muted testament to my resolve. Eventually, the metal path sloped upward and spat me out into a narrow chase yard, dimly lit by a single high-mounted lamp. Rain still pattered from the broken roof, pooling in rivulets across the cracked asphalt. I stumbled out, lungs burning, and took in my surroundings. A chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. a locked gate with a heavy padlock, and beyond it, the blurry shapes of delivery trucks parked under a wider floodlight. I set off toward the padlock, keeping low in case someone was watching from the windows above. Each drip of water on my shoulders felt like a heartbeat, each breath a countdown. My hands trembled as I moved to the gate. No bolt cutters in sight, but a tension rod from a nearby cart leaned against the fence. I grabbed it, wedged it under the chain, and heaved. The metal groaned, links bending until the padlock snapped open. I slipped through the gap, jogging for the nearest truck. Its cargo bay door was half open. Inside, crates of unmarked boxes were stacked to the ceiling. I ducked in, heart pounding, and crouched behind a column of boxes. Rainwater dripped from the ceiling, pooling in the corner. The dark interior smelled of damp cardboard and oil. Outside, footsteps approached in measured intervals. I pressed my back to the crates, willing myself to vanish into their shadow. The lamplight cast shifting patterns across the yard as boots trod back and forth. Ferguson's heavy heel, then Lee's lighter step. I heard them pause by the unlocked gate, breath misting in the cold air. "Damn it, he's gone," Ferguson snarled. "He can't have gotten far." "Check the trucks," Lee replied, voice strained. "He knows this yard." I squeezed my eyes shut, every nerve ending firing. My breathing slowed, matching the drip of water and the throb in my temples. Moments stretched, taut as a wire. I clenched the tension rod tight, ready to strike if they opened the cargo bay. Then the blacktop beneath my feet shivered with the roar of an engine. I peeked through a crack between boxes and saw headlights swinging into the yard. 2 vehicles side by side. One was a matte black van with no markings, the other a dark SUV with tinted windows. The engine in the SUV cut, and its taillights bled red across the crates. Liza's voice drifted down the ramp. "Don't move, Dan." Her silhouette appeared in the door of the van, rain slicking her hair. She held a pistol in one hand, the barrel aimed square at the cargo door. Behind her, the director stepped out of the SUV, hat in hand, eyes fixed on the crate I hid behind. My heart twisted. I should have run for the truck. I should have stayed hidden. But something in her gaze, the same sorrowful resolve, pulled me out. I rose slowly, tension rod raised in trembling hand. The director nodded once to Liza. She took a step forward, lowering her weapon to her side. "Get in," she said, voice firm. "We're getting you out of here." I didn't wait. I pressed out into the open, the tension rod falling from my numb fingers with a metallic clatter. The rain stung my cheeks as I climbed into the van. Liza slid in beside me and the door closed with a soft click. Inside, the engine purred, warmth flooding the cabin. The doors locked, and Liza took my hand, cold, damp, but real. For a heartbeat, I dared to hope. Then the back doors of the SUV opened. The director slid into the passenger seat, umbrella tucked under one arm. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, eyes glinting in the low light. The van's brake lights glowed, and the engine revved. We rolled forward, leaving the warehouse and my broken identities behind. Rain pounded the windshield in relentless sheets. Liza released my hand, wiped her eyes, and whispered, "You'll see them again, and not all of them will be friends." I swallowed, staring ahead into the curtain of rain and darkness. My reflection in the glass was a blur. No name attached, no badge number, just a man who'd lost everything he pretended to be. And above the roar of the tires, the director's voice crackled through the radio. "Detective Marley, what's your status?" I exhaled, the sound lost in the engine's growl. Outside, the highway stretched ahead, empty, bleeding into night. I didn't answer. The tires hissed beneath us as the van slid onto the back roads, the rain thinning into a whisper against the windows. Every mile felt like carving away layers of a past I no longer recognized. Lisa sat beside me, her shoulder brushing mine in silent solidarity, but her eyes were fixed on the road ahead, alert, unblinking. The director hovered at the front, hands folded in his lap, gaze fixed on his phone screen as if it held the fate of the world. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, tracing rivulets of water with a fingertip, willing them to spell out something, anything, that made sense. My ribs still ached from where I'd collided with crates. Each breath was a reminder of how close I'd come to bleeding out under those harsh warehouse lights. I wondered how much of me I'd shed along the way. Mac's swagger, Frank's tired shrug, Eli's nervous laugh. With every stolen identity, I'd buried a piece of myself, telling whatever lie kept me alive. But now, skin to skin with Liza's damp jacket, I felt naked. The director spoke without looking up. "We've cleared the perimeter. There's a safe house 2 miles up, abandoned shack on Miller's Creek Road. Secure communications. You'll lay low there until the morning." His tone was crisp, businesslike, as if I weren't in the back seat, tired, broken, undone. Liza's hand tightened around mine. I turned to her, searching for comfort in her storm-dark eyes. She closed her free hand around my shoulder, then let go, exhaling a breath I knew tasted of relief and regret. "You did good back there," she said quietly. "More than good, you saved yourself." I swallowed, voice hoarse. But at what cost? Every time I got close, the sergeants asked why there were gaps in surveillance. The brass asked why the files didn't add up. I lied to everyone. My thumb traced the wet perimeter of the window. How much am I responsible for? All the people who never knew me, never met Daniel Marley. Did I betray their trust? Her gaze softened, but there was steel beneath. "Being undercover always meant betrayal," she said. "That was the deal you signed. The only question is, who betrayed you?" I closed my eyes, the van's suspension rocking me like a cradle. Memory cut through the haze. The bartender's scowl as he raised his gun, Ferguson's curses tangled in wires, Lee's pleading look when he realized I'd lost the feed, my bullet-scorched shoulder, the pool of blood that still stained the floor of Al's lounge. Every face I'd worn had been a mirror, reflecting facets of me I didn't want to see. Morning light seeped through clouds as we turned onto a narrow dirt lane. The shack huddled behind overgrown brush, its windows boarded, paint peeled to, exposed gray wood rotting at the corners. Liza guided the van in and killed the engine. Silence fell, thick and expectant. She opened her door and extended her hand. I climbed out, chain of rainwater sliding down my neck. The director followed, handing me a tactical radio and a weathered coat. His eyes locked onto mine. "Check in at 0600, then we plan your next move." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I'd be ready to move again. He turned away, retreating toward the van with quiet authority. Liza lingered next to me, her coat draped over my shoulders. The fabric smelled like cedar and smoke, foreign but comforting. "I'm sorry I shot you," she said, then caught herself. I panicked. She ran a hand through her wet hair, the strands clinging to her cheek. "When I saw him with that kid, I thought you'd changed, too far gone." I stared at the mud at my boots, soft slurry that swallowed footprints. "You saved my life too," I admitted, even if I didn't know it in that moment. She pressed a card into my hand, an unmarked hotel key card. "If you get lost, call this number. Someone will pick you up." Her eyes flicked to the radio in my other hand. "And if they tell you to go back in, don't." I gripped her hand, the card crumpling in my palm. The wood beneath our feet groaned, as if echoing the weight between us. Liza stepped close, voice dropping to a hush. I have blood on my hands now. Lead you into this, set those traps, but I won't let them erase you. I swallowed, mortified by how much comfort her promise brought. I don't know who I am anymore. She cupped my face, her thumb brushing across the sting of a healing bruise. You're Daniel Marley, she said, each syllable deliberate. And they'll never take that away. Behind us, the director's silhouette receded into the morning gray. The van's taillights blinked once, then were gone. Liza leaned in, her forehead resting against mine, breath warm against my skin. The wind rustled the tall grass at the edge of the clearing. She whispered, "Keep your mask off. Let them see you." I exhaled, letting the words settle like dust in the air. I listened to the creak of the old shack and the distant drip of water from the sagging roof. Somewhere deep inside, a spark flickered. Life, maybe hope. Closing my hand around the card, I squared my shoulders against the chill. The world beyond the door waited, dark, dangerous, uncertain. I stepped forward, the wooden floorboards moaning beneath my boots, film of rainwater drying in patterns like fractured glass. My reflection caught in the window. Eyes haunted, face drawn, but unmistakably my own. And in that wavering image I heard a question, raw and resonant, echo through the quiet. Who am I when the record goes silent? I stepped out of the shack just as the first pale light of dawn filtered through ragged clouds, the chill breeze whispering across the clearing like a warning. My lungs still burned from the van's confinement, ribcage tight from bruises that bloomed in shades of purple. Somewhere behind me, Liza's footsteps faded into the shack's dark interior. You couldn't see her face in that dim glow, but I felt her presence in the soft thud of her boots, a steady heartbeat in the silence. The world beyond the shack was subdued, a narrow lane slick with last night's rain, hedgerows heavy with dew, the distant hum of early traffic on Miller's Creek Road. I slid my fingers over the hotel keycard in my coat pocket, the plastic edge worn smooth like the weight of every alias I'd carried. For a moment, I considered leaving it behind, burning the last breadcrumb that led back to me. But I kept it, a brittle tether to whatever plans the director still held. I found my feet moving of their own accord toward the edge of the clearing, toward the railroad tracks that cut across the fields. I'd once ridden those rails as Mac, drunk, desperate, willing to follow any rumor of a score. Now I approached with careful steps, the rails cold and slick under my boot, the ties warped and splintered with age. Each step felt like a confession. I was here. I existed outside the masks the world had pressed onto me. A train's distant horn cut through the morning hush, low and mournful. I squinted along the tracks, expecting to see a locomotive's headlights cresting the rise. Instead, I saw a lone figure standing between the rails, back to me, shoulders hunched. My heart stuttered. I recognized the stance, the tilt of the head, the curve of the spine. I didn't need to see her face to know it was Liza, waiting like a sentinel at the boundary between my old life and whatever lay ahead. "I told you they'd come," she said, voice soft enough to be carried away by the wind. "You can't outrun everyone who knows your name." I closed the distance, boots crunching on gravel. As I drew near, I caught the scent of her coat, cedar smoke, damp earth, and the faint tang of adrenaline still radiating from her. The tracks hummed with tension beneath us, a metal promise of motion, departure, escape. "Why are you here?" I whispered, though the question felt ridiculous. She'd stayed while I'd run. She turned, and the rising sun caught her features in a harsh glare. Cheekbones sharp, eyes storm gray, hair plastered to her temples by sweat and rain. She held out her hand. In her palm rested a small, brass key, the kind you use for old service doors, or padlocks that guard secrets long buried. "Because we're not done," she said. "They won't let you fade away, Dan. Not until you finish this." My thumb brushed the key's smooth surface, and I felt a jolt of recognition. The director's safe house, the control room's panic lock, the back exit of Al's lounge. Each key had belonged to a place I'd infiltrated, each lock a threshold I'd crossed. Now this key, small enough to fit a single drawer, was an invitation and a challenge. "Where does it go?" I asked, voice cracking. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "To the last identity you created," she said, "the one they never suspected." She paused, gaze flickering over the fields where the train tracks vanished into haze. Mac, Frank, Eli. All of them were echoes, but this one, it's fine-tuned. I stared at the key. Beyond us, the tracks stretched into nothing, but off to the right I saw the silhouette of an abandoned rail car. A rusted boxcar half buried in weeds, its graffiti-chipped doors slightly ajar. I remembered the plans. A mobile command post disguised as derelict freight, nestled in the back lots of the docks. They'd moved their operations there after Miami, after Detroit, always a step ahead of the Bureau. They called it the Haven, but no one had ever entered and returned to tell the tale. Liza's voice came again. They use it as a kill site, an evidence dump, a hub for things you don't want to see. You planted bugs in there once, but you never really went in. I swallowed, the key cold between my fingers. I'd scanned schematics, learned guard rotations, memorized maintenance access codes. I'd told myself it was just reconnaissance, but I'd never dared cross that threshold and see the hushed horrors inside. Tonight, I would. "Why now?" I said, tucking the key into my coat. She stepped closer, place of soldiers and conspirators standing behind her in the shadows. "Because they're pulling out. The director intends to burn all records. Everything goes, burned, buried, erased. If you don't step in tonight, you'll lose the one chance to unmask them for good and walk away clean." The wind picked up, carrying the rattle of distant freight cars. I felt the weight of her words settle in my gut, heavier than the chains that had once bound me. I closed my hand into a fist. "Then we end this tonight." She nodded, eyes steely. "Meet me at the siding at 2300. The Haven's only opening is that door. They change the code every week. Use the code you found in the motel's fuse panel." My pulse thundered as I retraced that code in my mind. 3 taps, 2 slides, 1 lift of the lever hidden behind peeling wallpaper. I'd thought it useless trivia, buried beneath layers of surveillance. Now, it was the key to everything. Liza stepped back into the track's shadow, vanishing into the early light as if she'd never been there. I glanced at the abandoned boxcar, a hulking silhouette swallowed by weeds and rust. The key in my pocket felt like an ember, burning with possibility and dread. I exhaled, shoulders straightening. Somewhere in the distance, a train's horn sighed again. A summons, a farewell, a promise of motion. I drew a steadying breath, the morning air crisp in my lungs, and turned toward the shack where my path would diverge once more. Behind me, the tracks hummed, the fields lay silent, and the world waited for my next step, for the detective stripped of every mask to claim his final truth. I pocketed the brass key and began the long walk back, each footfall echoing through empty fields, each step a choice between fading into myth or crashing through the last barrier that kept me from my own name. I returned to the shack just long enough to gather what I could carry. A single loaded magazine, my only weapon, tactical flashlight, my recorder with fresh batteries, the brass key tucked in a zip-locked pocket, and a slim utility blade. Liza met me on the porch, her breath visible in the chill night air. She handed me a battered fedora, part of my old Mac disguise, and nodded. 2,300, she reminded, voice a hushed timbre against the wind. I slipped into the coat she'd left behind and climbed into the back of the unmarked van. The drive to the rail yard was silent, except for the hum of tires on asphalt and the faint click of the engine's coolant fan as we idled beneath the underpass. Liza and the director exchanged few words, only glances and clipped commands. I sat between them, the darkness outside pressing against the windows like a living thing. I checked my watch, 22:47, 4 minutes until the Havens. Gates would open. I closed my eyes and rehearsed the code. Tap, 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 slide, slide, lever up. The pattern had lodged itself in my muscle memory after that motel job, a secret back door into the belly of their operations. At 22:53, we crept past the rusted security booth where the fading camera eye still whirred. The director cut the engine. "This is it," he whispered. He handed me the brass key. "In there." He nodded toward the boxcar bathed in moonlight beyond the cinder-block warehouse, and out the back hatch into the service tunnel. "It leads to the docks. We meet you there in 20. I slipped from the van, heart galloping so hard it rattled my ribs. The chain-link fence was low here, no barbed wire, but the ground was strewn with broken glass and twisted metal scraps. I scaled it quickly, boots scraping the top rail, and dropped silently into the gravel. Liza joined me in a single fluid motion. The director followed, pausing to dismantle a motion sensor array with a wire cutter. Sparks flew, the sensor died, and we slipped through the shadow of the warehouse. The boxcar door stood slightly ajar, the lock hanging open as if waiting for me. I slipped inside, flashlight in one hand, key in the other. The interior was a nightmare kaleidoscope of half-assembled crates, empty evidence bags, and blood splatters on the floor, so fresh it still glistened under the beam. My stomach clenched. I forced my gaze upward to the catwalk above, where pipes and cables intertwined like the underbelly of some mechanical beast. I found the small service hatch near the floor. It matched the brass key perfectly. With a click, the lock turned, and the hatch swung inward on rusted hinges. Beyond lay a narrow metal tunnel, damp and reeking of decay. I swallowed hard and slipped inside, the hatch clanging shut behind me. Liza slipped in beside me, and we pressed forward, single file, the tunnel's walls drumming with the echo of our footsteps. The director's voice crackled softly in my earpiece. "Proceed to Point Bravo. 4 corridors down, then right. Cameras will loop for 2 minutes." I counted the corridor markers on the walls, stenciled numbers fading under layers of grime. 1, 2, 3, 4. There it was. Bravo. I turned right into a wider shaft, littered with discarded gloves and shattered vial fragments. The tunnel ended at a reinforced door marked in half-obscured letters. LAB. Liza produced a keypad device, a crude emulator wired to my recorder, tapped the motel code sequence, and the door clicked. It swung open to reveal a makeshift lab that reeked of chemicals and rot. Brewing vats of amber liquid sat beside centrifuges coated in red residue. Stainless steel tables held rows of numbered evidence boxes. Hands, eyes, tissue samples, each tagged and sealed with the director's personal insignia. My flashlight beam trembled as it passed over stainless steel trays lined with syringes, surgical scalpels, and coils of tubing. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp. The director's furthest-reaching conspiracy lay bare before me. A cavalcade of grisly experiments on undercover assets. Agents who never returned, their organs harvested for leverage, data used to manipulate rival factions. I stepped forward, recorder rolling, snapping photos of each label. Agent Cruz, case 1703, Agent Kim, case 1811, Agent Boone, case 1907, names I'd never heard, lives erased without a trace. A soft click made me whirl around. Liza had slipped behind a table, flashlight trained on an unmarked hatch at the back wall. "They used this as a kill switch," she whispered. "Open it." I handed her the brass key, and she slid it into the hatch's lock. The steel panel grated open to reveal a masonry stairwell descending into blackness. Behind us, the lab lights flickered on, automated sensors reactivating. My heart seized. Figures appeared in the doorway, the director's operatives, faces half hidden by gas masks, rifles trained on us. No time to drift down the stairs. I grabbed Liza's arm, yanking her behind a vat of bubbling liquid. Bullets ricocheted, sending droplets of corrosive brew spiraling into the air. Liza returned fire, each crack of her pistol a drumbeat in my chest. I slid my recorder into my coat, crouched lower as the soldiers converged. Then, in a breathless moment, the director stepped into the lab, hatless, hands raised. He called out, voice calm, "Stand down." His men halted. Bullets clinked harmlessly into metal crates. He looked at me, his eyes the same storm gray as Liza's under the surveillance. "You have what you need." I realized then that every identity I'd worn, every secret I'd buried, had led to this confrontation. The undercover lives sacrificed, the conspiracies laid bare. The director nodded to Liza, and she lowered her weapon. Together, we walked toward the stairwell. My legs ached, but I moved, recorder clutched like a lifeline. We descended into darkness, footsteps echoing as the lab's lights vanished above us. The stairwell ended in a concrete chamber, flooded by the pale moonlight filtering through a grate overhead. Beyond lay the docks, silent, empty, save for the skeletal remains of shipping cranes. I took a step into the open air, each inhale carrying the brine of the harbor. Liza joined me, rain slicking her hair, face set with resolve. The director watched us from the stairwell, the last silhouette of authority. "The world will know," he said softly. "You're off the record now." I raised the recorder. The red light blinked. I exhaled, voice steady though fatigue weighed on me like lead. "All right, this is Detective Daniel Marley signing back onto the record." He nodded once, and I switched off the earpiece. Liza stood at my side as the dockyard's cranes groaned overhead. Beyond, the crackling harbor lights lay the city, bright, oblivious, hungry. I pressed the recorder's button to stop, the final click echoing in the hush. The truth was out there now, every name, every experiment, every betrayal. But in the silence that followed, I felt the edges of myself coalesce. No cover names, no broken codes. Just a man who'd walked through every mask and come home. I turned to Liza, throat tight with gratitude and grief. She brushed a strand of hair from my face, voice a whisper in the night. "Welcome back, Dan." I stared at the harbor's expanse, the rail lines leading nowhere, and asked the only question left unresolved, my voice soft but unyielding. "Who calls the shots when the record goes silent?" I pressed my face against the rain-spattered window of my unmarked Charger, watching the neon haze drip down the glass like smeared blood. I sipped the lukewarm coffee I'd bought from a 24-hour stand 2 blocks over, burnt, bitter but familiar, and let the engine's low hum lull me into Marcus Lowry. The name, felt hollow on my tongue, like a mask I'd picked up at a yard sale. I'd rehearsed his slurred accent for days. Slow Midwestern drawl, half-chewed consonants, questions trailing off into ellipses. It was supposed to be enough to pass in a back-alley bar that had seen more life die than flourish. At exactly 1:57 a.m., I stepped onto the cracked pavement. A neon sign buzzed overhead. Tony's Bar and Grill in flickering orange, its bulbs sputtering on the verge of burnout. I cradled my coffee cup against my chest, using its warmth to anchor me. Inside, the haze of cigarette smoke greeted me like a bad memory. The bartender, a thick-necked man with sleeves of old tattoos, didn't look up. He wiped a glass in half circles, eyes on the wall-mounted TV showing a broken football game. I slid onto a stool in the far corner, back against the wall, liars on all sides. I'd staked out this place for 3 nights before the meet. I knew the layout, the narrow hallway leading to the restrooms, the shuffle of the old floorboards, the crackling speaker behind the bar that played the same country tune on loop. I'd scoped the exit routes, the blind spots on both cameras, the siren of a police scanner I tucked in my jacket pocket. No one knew it was mine. I'd been counting minutes when I heard him. The door rattling in its frame, a silent whisper of movement. He slid into the seat beside me, hood shadowing most of his face. His voice was low, careful. "Lowry," he said, and I nodded as though waiting for an invitation. He ordered 2 shots of Jameson and spat, "You got the cash?" His words were clipped. No time for pleasantries. I set my coffee down, stabbed at the briefcase on my lap. Hands steady, I unclasped it and watched him lean in. The dim light caught the edges of $1,000 in 20s, stacked neat. His eyes flicked to my hands, muscles twitching behind the slits of his eyelids. "Good," he murmured. He slid a manila envelope toward me, unmarked, unremarkable, and heavy with promise. Undercover ops always hinged on little exchanges like that. A briefcase for an envelope, truth buried beneath layers of deception. My wiretap nestled beneath the bar mat, its hidden mic alive with static whispers of our conversation. He slipped out a folded piece of paper, a list of names, dates, phone numbers, all the daisy chain leading to the city's covert arm dealers. He said, "Check these out, and we move on T-2 days." I tucked the envelope inside my jacket, feeling its bulk against my rib cage. My pulse thudded against my ribs, each beat counting down the moments before the bust. He downed his shot in one go, slammed the glass on the counter, and melted into the crowd. I lingered a moment, drained my coffee, then rose and walked toward the exit. My legs felt like I'd poured them from lead. The bar doors creaked in a way that made every nerve flare. Outside, the sky was a black so deep it swallowed headlights whole. I paused under the neon glow, letting the cold rain wash over my face. Half remorse, half relief. I closed my eyes and exhaled, tasting metal on my tongue. I climbed into the charger and flicked on the scanner. My partner, Sanchez, crackled through the speaker, "All green. Meet at the docks in 5. ETA? 3, I replied, voice hoarse. He acknowledged, then silence again. I backed out onto the street, tires spraying puddles. The GPS guided me toward the abandoned loading docks off Route 19, a rusting graveyard of shipping containers and rust. The plan was simple. I'd play Marcus Lowry one more time, then flash my real badge once the targets were in sight, seize the cash, seize the envelope, and wrap up a case that had dragged on too long. At 2:34 a.m., I pulled into Lot 12. The sky cracked open with thunder, rain pounding the roof like angry fists. My recorder hid in the glove compartment, its red light blinking once per second, heartbeat in a dark chest. I switched off the engine and slipped into my black trench coat, the collar turned up against the storm. My ID badge, concealed between 2 layers of fabric, felt like a hot coal against my skin. I approached the chain-link fence and cut through it, wires snagging my coat. Halfway across, I paused, heard muffled voices. I crouched behind an overturned crate, peered through a mossed-up gap. 3 men stood by a stack of wooden pallets, their silhouettes jigging in the torchlight. One held a briefcase, another clutched a handgun. The third was slim, dark-haired, nodded to the others. That was my window. I breathed in, cold, damp tang that burned my lungs. I tapped my comm. Dispatch, eyes on suspects, 3 targets at the north pallet stack. My earpiece crackled, then, copy. DB7, teams moving in. I risked a glance. They were on schedule. I stepped out of cover and raised my hands, badge hidden but my posture authoritative. Freeze. Police. My voice cracked, first real accent I'd used all night. The gunman whirled, pointed his weapon. I saw the flash of recognition in his eyes, an instant's hesitation that felt like a blow to my chest. He didn't shoot, he didn't move. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. The silence shattered as SWAT burst from the shadows. Shouts ripped through the rain, echoing off corrugated metal. The gunman dropped the briefcase. I lunged, grabbing the slim man, twisting his arm. Lightning cracked overhead. Thunder followed like applause. I handcuffed them both, blood hammering in my ears. The dock floodlights painted everything in harsh white strokes. The rain streamed off my coat, water pooling around our boots. The suspects lay face down, cuffed, shouting. I stood over them, Marcus Lowry dead in the water, and me, the real detective, bleeding adrenaline. But as the suspects were hauled into the paddy wagons, I looked at the briefcase on the ground. Rain had seeped inside. The envelope was soggy. Ink ran across the paper like spilled blood. I stared at it, heart sinking. Had I seized the right evidence, or had I let something slip through the cracks of my own deception? A flicker in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving between containers where no one should be. I froze, breath catching in my throat. The storm roared around me. I turned slowly, hung in the eye of that storm, and the whisper of footsteps scraped against the metal floor. Then nothing but the thunder and the rain's relentless drum, leaving me alone in the pale glow of those lights, listening for a name that might have just called me by my real one. I slipped out of the Charger and melted into the shadows between the stacked containers, rain drumming a frantic tattoo on my collar. The floodlights overhead carved long black slashes across the wet asphalt, and every time I inhaled, the air tasted of rust and gasoline. I'd shed Marcus Lowry for a moment, dumped the trench coat, unhooked the badge from its hidden clip, and I was just me, Detective Walker, slick with rain and regret. The pickup truck idled at the far end, its engine ticking as it cooled. Inside, 2 of the suspects from the dock sat handcuffed, backs against the tailgate, breathing ragged in the sudden storm. I approached with measured steps, each footfall a reminder that I was back on his territory. I crouched and looked up at their faces, illuminated by the truck's brake lights. The taller one spat onto the ground. "You think we're the only ones you'll never catch, Walker." His voice was mockery, laced with defiance. He jerked his head toward the dark warehouse entrance. "You've got bigger fish. We're just minnows." I said nothing. Instead, I stood and glanced toward the open bay door of the nearest warehouse. The wind pushed through like a cold blade, carrying the faint echo of metal scraping on concrete. Something had changed inside, movement I hadn't accounted for. I stepped forward, radio clipped to my shoulder. Sanchez overs. No, go on the sweep. I'm checking inside. Backup. 10 minutes out. Static crackled in response. I had no real backup. When the storm broke, teams couldn't move in. I was alone, weighed by every decision I'd made tonight. The warehouse door groaned on its rusted hinges. I raised my flashlight and stepped inside. The beam fought the darkness, cutting through desks overturned like discarded carcasses, cardboard boxes torn open, their contents strewn like entrails. A low hum vibrated through the floor. An electrical generator, overloaded. I moved deeper, every sense on alert. The smell of stale tar mixed with sweat. My wiretap recorder lay in my pocket, no need for it here. Here, I needed my instincts. I reached the center of the cavernous room, flashlight revealing a makeshift command post. Folding tables with laptops, maps tacked on the wall, strings connecting photos and clippings, a spider's web of corruption. My breath caught. This wasn't just a street-level bust. This was something higher. At the table, 4 figures hunched over blueprints. One glanced up and froze, recognition flickering in his eyes. I stepped forward, badge out, voice calm but firm. Everyone down. Police chaos unspooled. A man to my left yanked a pistol from his waistband, but I was already moving, arm sweeping up, disarming him with a snap of muscle memory. The gun clattered to the floor. Flashlight beams crossed, illuminating faces contorted in shock. I barked, "On your knees, now." They complied, suit jackets hitting concrete. I muzzle-checked each man, 2 more guns tucked in their belts. I cuffed them in under 10 seconds. Rain dripped through a crack in the roof, hissing as it landed on laptops and blueprints. I grabbed one of the laptops, pried it open, files encrypted, but the homepage spelled it out. Operation Red Veil, Mayor's Office, PD Chief, Circuit Prosecutor. My skin crawled. I stashed the drive in my jacket. My fingers trembled around the cuffs and data, my breathing ragged. I radioed in falsities. Suspects detained. Evidence secured, team on the scene. But my team was miles away, waiting on a phantom signal. I was the signal. Footsteps thundered behind me, heavy leather. I turned, flashlight sweeping to catch the nearest man rising, jaw clenched, eyes furious. "Walker," he spat, using my real name like a curse. "You think you're untouchable? You think this is justice?" He lunged. I sidestepped, barely blocking his fist. Our knuckles scraped metal, the tables trembled. I pressed my advantage, grabbing his lapel and slamming him into the table, blueprints ripping like wet paper. The other men watched, breathing ragged, the tension coiled tight. I led him up, face inches from mine. I murmured through clenched teeth, "This ends tonight." But in his eyes, I saw the network stretching beyond these walls, tentacles wrapping around the city. I realized I wasn't just a detective. I was a single spark in a powder keg of lies. I shoved the man back to the ground, retrieved the pistol one suspect had dropped, turned toward the exit, only to freeze. In the doorway, framed by flickering lightning, stood Ronnie Vega, arms folded, wet hair plastered to her face. Her gaze was cold, unblinking. She stepped forward, her boots clicking on the concrete floor. The barrel of the gun in my hand felt heavier than before. "You thought you could come here alone, Walker? You thought you could play everyone?" I swallowed. The generator hummed. Monitors on the table flickered with incoming messages. Security footage from docks, bar, motel. Every operation laid bare in neon white windows. Her lips curved into a slow, knowing smirk. I lowered the gun, tension coiling in my gut. "I've been following you," she said, voice soft as cigarette smoke. "From the bar to the docks to here. You're not the only one with 1,000 faces. I glanced at the laptop. Her file was never on the list. She wasn't a suspect. She was the filter, the ghost moving through every operation. She tilted her head, and thunder cracked overhead, shaking the rafters. I raised the pistol again, but she didn't flinch, just watched me, eyes cold as the rain. A soft click sounded to my right, a silenced pistol. My breath hitched. I spun, the flash of metal under a hand as another figure caught me off guard. A whispered voice, barely a sigh. Drop the gun. The barrel trembled in my grip. I exhaled, rain dripping from my eyelashes, and then silence, save for the distant roar of thunder and the slow drip, drip, drip of water from the broken roof above, leaving me caught between two shadows who knew every name I'd ever worn. I backed out of the warehouse into the downpour, the weight of the USB drive burning against my chest. My coat lay discarded between rusting pallets. Every step through the mud dragged me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. Flashing lights from the docks cut through the rain, false dawn for this city's corruption. I tightened my grip on the drive and followed the gravel path toward the riverbank, mind racing through every name I'd seen on those blueprints. The shoreline was deserted, save for driftwood tangled in the reeds and the distant hum of a barge's engine. I crouched by the water's edge, sliding the drive from my jacket pocket. Fingers trembling, I pulled out my phone, connected it to the portable decryptor I'd stashed in my car. The screen flickered, then resolved into a desktop interface that made my gut twist. Folders labeled PD chain, Mayor's shells, media blackmail. I tapped PD chain lines of text scrolled faster than I could read. Meetings, wire transfers, quid pro quo deals. My heart drummed in my ears like the rain on the charger's roof. I slapped my palm against my mouth to stifle a curse. This wasn't a case. It was the skeleton in the city's closet, every bone gasping for air. A sudden crack behind me made me spin. The river's tide had shifted aboard on the dock, its echo amplified in the empty night. I swallowed the cold, breath ragged and uneven. I stowed the drive back in my coat. This evidence was too hot to expose where anyone could see. I needed to regroup, plan my next move. But as I rose, headlights cut across the horizon, a black SUV sliding to a stop at the water's edge. I ducked behind a stack of crates, breath catching. Two silhouettes stepped out, rain dripping from their hats. One was Ronnie Vega, her eyes bright in the glow of the headlights. The other, a man in a tailored overcoat, face obscured by shadow. They moved toward me with deliberate steps, the crunch of gravel announcing each footfall like a heartbeat. I risked a glance. Ronnie's lips curved into that same knowing smirk. She held her hand out. The man with her produced a set of handcuffs, clicking them open. I knew the drill: cuff me, flash a badge, recite my charges. But the drive in my pocket burned hotter. "Come quietly, Walker," the man said, voice smooth as oil. "We have a lot to discuss." I rose, blinking rain from my eyelashes. My mind scrambled through options: run, fight, negotiate. The man advanced, and I saw him reach for a pistol tucked beneath his coat. My hand darted to mine, but the barrel felt slick with rain. Before I could draw, Ronnie stepped between us. "Not yet," she purred. She laid a gloved finger on my chest. "We need you to vouch for us, Detective. We have leverage, your evidence, our immunity." Her gaze flicked to the drive in my coat. "It's a trade." Trade, like every operation I'd done before, a negotiation between wolves. My breath pooled in my lungs. Was I the hunter or the hunted? Lightning split the sky. Thunder rumbled, shaking the dock. I swallowed hard, mind racing through every undercover alias, every whispered code word. One misstep could shatter the fragile facade I'd built over 15 years. I met Ronnie's eyes. "You think I'll just hand it over?" I kept my voice steady, though my fingers trembled. She smiled. A sad, tired thing. "I think you know there's no turning back once you broadcast that evidence. The city will burn, and so will you." She nodded to the man in the overcoat. He clicked the cuffs open and held them out. My pulse thundered. A soft breeze lifted the pages of a dropped blueprint in the mud. I saw our silhouettes reflected in the river, 3 figures locked in the pale glare of the SUV's headlights, each one poised on a line of betrayal. I took a step forward, weight shifting. The barrel of my gun pressed into my side. The handcuffs gleamed like broken promises. And I realized the final mask I'd worn, Detective Walker, was just another alias, one I might never shed again. I lifted my hands. The drive throbbed against my ribs. I thought, whatever happens next, the city will never look the same. And I whispered into the rain, "Do your worst." I pressed through the warehouse's side door, rain-soaked steel groaning beneath my boots. The wind clawed at my collar as I ducked back into the open air, the storm's fury carving jagged shadows across the container stacks. My fingertips grazed the USB drive in my pocket, a hot coal I couldn't drop. I clutched it tighter, breath hitching in the cold night. Up ahead, the alley between 2 rows of shipping containers was darker than everything else, a yawning void that swallowed the floodlight's glow. I edged forward, chest tight, senses straining for any hint of movement. The hum of the distant freeway faded behind me, replaced by the storm's ceaseless hiss and the scuff of my boots on slick concrete. At the alley's mouth I paused. The air tasted of diesel and wet cardboard. A stray cat, fur matted, skittered away, startled by my silhouette. I exhaled sharply and ducked into the narrow passage. The walls closed in. Rain dripped like breath from overhead tarps. My mind replayed every step that led me here. The bar, the docks, the motel, the warehouse. Each alias I'd worn felt like a layer of skin I'd shed and left behind. I reached the alley's midpoint and froze. Footsteps echoed softly against metal. I aimed my flashlight into the gloom. "Detective Walker." My voice crackled, unsteady as I called out. Silence answered, except for the storm and the beat of my own heart. Then, from the darkness, came a low murmur, too measured to be coincidence. I shifted and saw movement. A figure draped in a raincoat, body obscured by shadows. Behind him, another, leaning against the container wall, arms folded, shapes drifting in and out of the light. My hand dropped to my belt, fingertips brushing the grip of my service weapon. The raincoat's hood fell back, revealing a face I never expected. Marcus Lowry's features, my own borrowed accent incarnate, stared back at me with unreadable eyes. I swallowed, mind reeling. "Who the hell—" He stepped forward, voice alias perfect. "You forgot one identity, Walker." Cold struck my spine. My pulse pounded. I realized I'd never met this man, this walking mask of me. But he knew every breath I'd taken. The second figure moved too. Ronnie Vega, slick hair plastered to her cheeks, lips curling into a knowing grin. "Alias Inception," she said, voice low. "You thought you were the only detective wearing a mask." I raised my gun, fingers trembling. The raincoat man held up his hands. "Easy, we're not here to kill you." My chest tightened. The thunder rolled low. I willed myself to steady breathing. "Then what do you want?" He tilted his head. "The drive." I exhaled a laugh, dry, humorless. "You'll have to pry it from my cold, dead fingers." Ronnie stepped closer, boots silent on the wet ground. "You underestimate us, Detective. We know every step you've taken, every lie you've learned to love. The raincoat man snapped open a map, its paper damp, ink bleeding. A grid of the city with red circles at every crime you'd solved, every operation you'd run. He pointed to one, Block C, the jail where the first shadows began. Your secrets started there. I felt bile rise. That was a glitch. He smiled, half pity, half triumph. Nothing's a glitch, everything's surveillance. I swallowed hard, grip tightening on the pistol. The storm felt closer now, the night air humming with electricity. I realized the alley was no longer a safe corridor, but a hunting ground. My aliases huddled behind me like dry bones, rattling. I raised my voice. Get out of my head, you don't own me. Ronnie advanced until her rain-slicked boots were inches from mine. She whispered, we own every mask you've ever worn. So hand it over. I glanced down at my hand, gun barrel slick with rain, and then at the USB drive's bulge in my coat. The storm's rain pounded harder, drumming against metal lids overhead. Lightning cleaved the sky, and for a fraction of a second I saw every face I'd ever been. Lowry, Monroe, Grant, Walker. Masks worn like second skin, all peeled back to reveal the same hollow man. My breath hitched. I had to decide. Fight two ghosts of my own making, or surrender the one truth I'd risked everything to protect. I stepped out of the alley into the flooded street, the storm's howl swallowed by the city's distant roar. My boots squelched in ankle-deep water as I clutched the USB drive against my chest. Every drop of rain felt like ice needles carving into my collarbone, and every breath tasted of gasoline and regret. Ahead, the street lamps flickered in half-life, their pale halos broken by sheets of water. I glanced down at the map I'd snatched, a smeared smear of red circles tracing the city's pulse of corruption. My heart thudded as I realized I'd only scratched the surface. The warehouse raid had revealed one node, but dozens more waited in the shadows. Every alley, every back office, every legitimate business was potentially part of the network. And now, with two ghosts of my own making at my heels, I had to choose. Eradicate the rot at its roots, or walk away and watch it spread. I pulled my collar tighter and headed south toward the heart of the district. Storefronts blurred by torrential rain, closed convenience stores with shattered windows, neon open 24/7 signs flickering a leaky welcome, shuttered mechanic shops echoing with dripping metal. My mind replayed the night's betrayals, the faces that weren't what they purported to be. I'd slipped through dozens of identities, but none felt like me anymore. At the corner of 5th and Broad, I paused under a battered awning. I fished my phone from my pocket and tapped Sanchez's number, once my partner, now my only lifeline. The line rang twice, then went to voicemail. I exhaled, fingers slick on the screen. No answer. He'd gone dark, likely on orders from above, or perhaps he'd been compromised too. The network ran deeper than I'd imagined. I pocketed the phone and moved on. My next stop was a nondescript office building 2 blocks down, an address from the mayor's shells folder. The lights inside flickered behind Venetian blinds. After-hours traffic trickled out of the adjacent parking garage. I crept along the sidewalk, each step a silent hymn to paranoia. At the building's rear entrance, I knelt and peered up at the security panel. 4 digits. A fact of professional courtesy, but I didn't have them. Instead, I produced a slim gem from my coat, pocket, acquired on a dead drop months ago. With practiced fingers, I jiggled the lock until it clicked open. The door swung inward with a groan that sounded like metal on bone. Inside, the lobby was cavernous. Marble floors veined with grime, potted plants dead in their corners, a reception desk littered with dust-cloaked brochures. My flashlight beam carved a path toward the elevator bank. I pressed the button. It hummed, then arrived with a shudder. Doors opening onto a dark car with overhead lights gone dark. I stepped inside, clipped my badge to the panel's sensor, and watched as the control panel lit up with floor numbers. The drive's weight pressed into my ribs as I punched 7. The elevator creaked upward, stuttering through each level. I leaned against the wall, mind racing through every contingency. If I walked into a trap, I'd have to fight my way out, and I wasn't sure how many bullets I had left. The doors opened on the 7th floor, a silent corridor lined with closed office doors. I slipped out, flashlight slicing across polished wood and brass nameplates. Nearly every office was dark, blinds drawn, their plaques engraved with innocuous titles: Aspen Group LLC, Bayfront Holdings, Meridian Investments. I stopped at the last door. Nameplate scratched off, residue of a removed label still clinging. Perfect for a front. I pressed my ear to the door, muffled voices inside. 2 men, one with a clipped corporate accent, the other lower, huskier, dripping with entitlement. I pressed the handle. It creaked open into a narrow office illuminated only by the glow of multiple monitors. At a folding table, 3 figures hunched over keyboards, screens full of spreadsheets, financial ledgers and files marked Mayor's Campaign Funds. Behind them, a dusty window overlooked the streets I'd just crossed. Shadows danced across their faces as lightning flashed. They didn't notice me slip in. I dropped into a crouch, scanning the monitors. One displayed a live feed from a camera on the docks, my docks from earlier tonight. Another showed the bar, the moment of exchange recorded from above. The third feed was from inside the jail's Block C corridor, my first shadow sighting. Evidence of surveillance everywhere I'd been. The network had eyes in every mask I'd worn. A voice snapped behind me. "Detective Walker!" I spun. 2 men had risen, pistols leveled. Their suits were tailored, but their eyes held raw malice. I raised my hands, flashlight clattering to the floor. My throat tightened as I met their stares. "I'm not here to kill you," I rasped. "Just explain this surveillance." The taller one smirked, voice slick as oil. "Surveillance is a 2-way street, detective. We listen to you, record you, follow you." He gestured to the monitors. "Every undercover off you've ever known, every code word, every wiretap." A bolt of fear stabbed me. They'd anticipated my moves long before I donned the trench coat. They'd predicted my every alias. And now, cornered, I had to decide whether to fight. A losing battle against ghosts or bargain. I swallowed, mind racing. Why not just bury me? You have me trapped between shadows. I nodded toward the monitors. The second man chuckled. "Because we want something. We want you to feed us intel on your department's next move. We want access to every file you have on the cleanup ops. Your badge or your life." Electricity buzzed overhead as another storm surge rattled the building. My pulse hammered like a wounded animal. I sized them up, 2 against 1, not great odds. But I still had my gun, my instincts, and the USB drive tucked inside my jacket. My jaw clenched. "I'll never help you." I drew my pistol and leveled it at them, finger hovering above the trigger. They laughed, low, chilling. "You'll have no choice." The taller man stepped back, pressing a button on a remote. The monitors went black, lights in the room dying in an instant, swallowed by darkness. My flashlight flickered as they advanced. My pistol trembled in my grip. Every alias I'd shed whispered in my mind, mocking me. A single shot rang out from behind. A deafening crack that split the silence. The wall to my left erupted in splinters. I spun toward the sound, adrenaline scorching my veins. In the doorway stood Sanchez, soaked to the bone, revolver smoking in his hand. His eyes were hard, battle-worn. "Drop it," he barked. "Now." I froze, gun pointed at two figures advancing through the drifting gloom. My partner had arrived just in time, but for what? Rescue? Or a final betrayal? The air thickened with tension. Rain drummed through the broken window. My thumb hovered over the magazine release, and in that heartbeat I realized, no matter who pulled the trigger, the next shot would decide whether I died as Detective Walker or as nothing but another ghost in the system. I pivoted on the balls of my feet, eyes scanning the darkened office where Sanchez's silhouette stood, framed by the broken window. His revolver's barrel gleamed in the intermittent lightning flash. The two operatives, caught between our guns, froze mid-stride, one's finger grazing the trigger of his semi, the other clutching a worthless corporate badge. My heart slammed against my ribs like a war drum. "Detective," Sanchez hissed, voice low, urgent. "You all right?" I didn't trust myself to answer. My jaw worked as I swallowed, my throat tight. The revolver in his hand spelled salvation or deceit. I didn't know which. The operatives shifted, tension coiling in their shoulders. Without thinking, I stepped forward. "Work with me," I rasped. "Cover me." His eyes flicked to mine, doubt wrestling with relief. But he nodded, stance widening. The taller operative barked, "Drop your weapons." Sanchez's finger twitched on the trigger. Mine clenched the grip of my Glock, rain-slick leather pressing into my palm. The room smelled of wet carpet and fear, charged electric by the storm raging outside. I took a breath and raised my free hand, palm outward. "Wait," my voice cut through the thunder. "We have a bigger target." The operatives exchanged glances. Their leader, the one who'd seized me outside, narrowed his eyes. "What target?" "You two against us don't change the fact you're trespassing." I risked a glance at the monitors behind them, now dark, wires hanging loose. The bar, the docks, the jail, all blank screens. But I knew they held everything I'd done, and I knew what I had to do. "Outside," I said, voice firm. "Let's talk outside." They hesitated, dangerous in its own right. But Sanchez stepped forward, revolver unwavering. "Now," he growled. We filed out through the broken window onto the fire escape platform, wind lashing us. Lightning slit the sky, and thunder rattled the building's bones. Below us, the alley had become a river of garbage and water. I held the drive aloft, rain plastering my hair, water sluicing off my coat. "This," I yelled above the storm, "is proof of a conspiracy that goes all the way to City Hall. We can play a game of who shoots whom and bury it, or we bring it into the light." The operative in the overcoat spat. "You're bluffing." I met his gaze. My every alias, every bribe, every undercover move, it all converged in this moment. "You and I both know I'm not." Sanchez's gaze flicked between us. He lowered his revolver an inch. The overcoat man's lip curled. "No deal." He lunged, and Sanchez fired. The crack echoed, and the man jerked as the round caught his shoulder, spinning him into the railing. He slumped, grip slipping on his pistol. The other operative raised his gun, but Sanchez leveled his revolver and the man froze, eyes wide. I stepped forward, adrenaline scorching. "Hand over your weapons," I ordered. He dropped his semi, clattering against the metal stairs. Sanchez cuffed him with efficient brutality. I moved to the wounded man, rifle in my hand. "Show me everything," I said, voice low. He swallowed, pain twisting his features, but compliance won out. We marched down the fire escape, Sanchez backing them both, into the flooded alley. The thunderstorm hammered the city as though it wanted to wash away every sin. I stood in the torrent, blue and red police lights converging in the rain. The two operatives lay face down, cuffed. Sanchez holstered his revolver and looked at me. What now? I glanced at the drive in my hand, feeling its heat, its promise. The city's giant skeleton exposed at last. Now, I said, we end it. I slipped the drive into my jacket and slid into the Charger beside Sanchez. The city spread out before us. Dark streets, neon ghosts, 1,000 hidden cameras. I started the engine. He glanced at me, uncertain, wary. I met his eyes. You trust me? He hesitated, then nodded. We do this together. The Charger shot forward through the storm, tires swamping a sea of water. I gripped the wheel, heart pounding, ready for the reckoning. Somewhere in the city, men in power slept uneasy, knowing I held the blade over their throats. Lightning fractured the sky above. An omen or an answer, I wasn't sure. But as the Charger roared into the night, I reminded myself I was Walker again, finally unmasked, and I would not let this truth drown in the rain. I parked the Charger beneath the flickering street lamp and shut off the engine, chest heaving as the rain tapered to a steady mist. In the back seat lay 2 sets of cuffs and the dark bundle of files the operatives had surrendered, trailers of digital proof heavier than any weight I'd carried in my life. Sanchez sat beside me, silent, his eyes fixed on the glow of my phone as I decrypted the final folders. In seconds, the screen bloomed with names. Judges, councilmen, even a captain in my own department. Faces I recognized from precinct briefings, now circling in that red web of betrayal I'd traced on those blueprints. I leaned back, fingers trembling. We have enough to bring the whole house down, I said, voice raw. The city outside blurred, neon halos on wet pavement. A taxi splashing through a puddle like a ghost's heartbeat. Sanchez exhaled slowly. We need to go in together, he murmured. Chain of command, internal affairs, make it bulletproof. I nodded. Trust didn't come easy, not after every alias I'd worn, every double cross I'd lived through. But this drive, this data, it wasn't about me anymore. It was about the oath I'd taken before I'd ever donned a mask. I slid the USB drive into my pocket, pressed the home button on my phone, and watched the progress bar crawl toward completion. Every name it revealed was a promise of justice, or revenge. The precinct was empty at this hour, lights dimmed, desks strewn with cold coffee cups and case files long collected. I set the files on the chief's oak desk, steps echoing in the silent hall. Sanchez followed, badge clipped tight beneath his raincoat. I pushed open the office door, only to find it already ajar. Inside, the lamp was on, casting a lone pool of light over the carpet. My captain stood behind the desk, hands folded like a judge. His badge gleamed, real, official, but his eyes were void of surprise. He smiled slowly, voice calm as a grave. I was wondering when you'd arrive, Walker. My heart stalled. The files I'd gathered, every secret I'd uncovered, lay between us. I realized then that this wasn't a trap of bullets. It was a chamber of whispers. My captain's gaze was too steady, too certain. We've been watching you, he said, touching the corner of the decrypted folder. Every step you took, every mask you wore, led you right here. Sanchez stiffened behind me, hand drifting toward his holster. But I held up a hand. No friend left in this storm but the truth itself. I straightened, voice steady. I'm here to turn in evidence. He nodded. A slow, deliberate bow of the head. And I'm here to ensure it never sees the light. His hand reached beneath the desk, emerging with an identical USB drive. You missed one file. Lightning flickered overhead through the window blinds, painting us in stark black and white. The precinct felt like a tomb. Walls lined with portraits of officers who'd given their lives, now witnesses to my final undoing. I glanced at Sanchez, eyes pleading, but he only watched with grim resignation. There was nowhere to run now, no mask left to slip into. I swallowed. Breath caught in my throat as the captain held out the drive. The thunder outside rolled like a verdict. I reached forward, and then hesitated, realizing that the last secret wasn't in any file. It was the one I carried inside me. The choice I'd make now. I exhaled, closing my eyes against the lamp's harsh glare. When I opened them again, I said only 4 words. Do it. I punched out a deep breath and eased onto the vinyl stool, the cracked neon sign humming overhead like a warning. The place called itself the Rusted Spur, but smelled more like old grease and desperation. Half-empty pitchers of beer turned sour in the light of a flickering bulb, cigarette smoke curling around the cracked ceiling tiles. I was Mike Reynolds for this shift, carded at the door, kin to a local grease monkey who'd flat-out disappeared last month. My wire recorder sat in my glove compartment back at the Hyundai, but here, right now, it whispered through my thigh holster, an itch I couldn't scratch. I ordered a black coffee, extra shot of adrenaline. The bartender, Lurch, by way of loose lips and a slack jaw, slid it over like he'd been waiting for weeks for a stranger to sit down. I studied every pore on his face, the way his chipped nail tapped the counter, the dart of his eyes whenever someone left the darkened corner booth. My target was Reyes, a mid-tier courier for the Valencia crew. Tonight, I was supposed to be an eager recruit. Out-of-towner, no questions asked, straight cash to facilitate a drop somewhere out by the 3 a.m. strip mall. At 2:03, a figure slipped through the door. He wore an unzipped hoodie, the hood pulled low. I locked onto him before he even sat. A faint swagger in his shoulders, the glint of a gold chain glimpsed under the diffuse neon. He slid onto the stool 2 spaces down, elbows on the counter. I wondered if he'd clocked the fake grease stain on my sleeve, the way I tried to mimic his accent. My coffee burned the back of my throat when I swallowed. "Whatcha havin'?" I croaked, voice rough as gravel. That got his attention. He turned slowly, stared me down with eyes like slick asphalt. "Name's Mike," I said, keeping tone casual. "Heard you might be moving something tonight." I let the words hover. The jukebox sputtered. A warped cassette of some faded country tune came to life, guitars jangling like broken teeth. Reyes's gaze flicked to the jukebox, then back to me. "Depends who's asking," he growled. I felt my pulse trip over itself. I slid a $100 bill across the counter. Larger bills always helped blur suspicion. He watched it slide, then pushed it back, silent. I caught the faint tremor in his knuckles. Between us, the stale air grew heavy. I wanted to know the location, the contacts, proof of product. But my biggest fear was that I'd get one word wrong, wrong accent, wrong slang, and he'd gut me where I sat. Sweat beaded at my hairline. The bar's single ceiling fan struggled against the humidity, whispering threats in the shadows. Finally, Reyes leaned in. "Room 12 at the Maplewood," he said, voice low enough that the cavernous room swallowed it. "Be there, 1 minute after 3. Show the cash, I show you the goods." His hand drifted toward a battered duffel bag by his boot. My stomach lurched. I nodded once, sharp, and drained my coffee in a single swallow that tasted like burnt rubber. I stashed the cash in my coat pocket and stood, letting my chair scrape across the floor so loud I half expected Reyes to turn. But he didn't. I slipped out the door, the humid outside air a relief against my skin. My Hyundai sat where I parked, rear bumper caked with the red grit of the county road. I slid in, too keyed up to breathe easily. I keyed the mic. "Dispatch, this is Mike. No issues. Status green." Static, then nothing. I jammed the ignition. It croaked. I pressed on the gas. Headlights cut through curtain-like darkness as I navigated toward the Maplewood Motel. Rain hadn't started yet, but the sky was bruised, thick, low clouds that threatened to break. As I approached, I saw the peeling sign, Maplewood Motel, vacancy. One arching bulb flickered above the office window, half shaded by a smear of insect carcasses. 3:02 a.m. on the dashboard clock. I grabbed the cash and approached room 12's door. It was carved with initials, some half-hearted memorial to who knows what. I knocked twice. No answer. I rapped again, low and urgent. My breath puffed in small clouds. I knocked a third time. Silence stretched. Then the door clicked open. A woman stood there, mid-20s, cheeks hollow, eyes too bright in the dim corridor light. She blinked at me, stunned. "Officer?" Her voice hit a pitch that made my spine seize. She looked worn, like she'd been waiting for me or dreading me. The duffel bag lay at her feet. "Reyes?" I hissed, ignoring protocol. "Where is he?" Her lips parted, no words. She shook her head slowly, tears shining. Behind her, the room was empty. No furniture except a single metal folding chair turned on its side. The carpet was askew. I felt a tremor in my chest. This wasn't the drop I expected. She glanced at the hallway behind me. "Please," she whispered, voice quivering. Her hand trembled at her side. "He said I wouldn't know he was gone." The corridor light flickered, buzzed, then died, pitch black. My flashlight beam stabbed into the void. I heard a click. Handcuffs? A radio? I couldn't tell. The darkness seemed to swallow her voice. "They'll come," she said, but the words crawled into my ears like maggots. My pulse thundered. I clicked my flashlight off and on, searching. The hallway remained empty. I spun back to room 12. She'd vanished. The door was now closed, framed tight against the jamb. My radio crackled to life. Static at first, then my own voice. "Dispatch. I need backup at the Maplewood. Possible hostage situation." My heart sank. That wasn't me. I reached for the handle. It rattled firm but opened. No sign of life inside. Only the duffel, zip halfway undone, spilling nothing but darkness. I stepped in. The door slammed behind me, hard enough to jar my teeth. I yanked it open. Empty hallway. My footsteps echoed as I fled back to my car, stomach twisting. I threw open the driver's door and glanced up at the second-floor balcony. A silhouette stood there, just beyond the flickering light, watching. I locked the doors and tore away, tires spinning on the gravel. The motel shrank in my rearview mirror, its neon sign buzzing into the night. Ahead, the wet road glistened. My fingers trembled on the wheel. My feed on the radio crackled again. "Mike? Are you there?" I leaned forward. The voice was softer. Too soft, familiar. "Who is this?" I whispered, throat raw. A silence so thick it pressed against my eardrums. Then the whisper came, "You should never have come alone." And the line went dead. I eased off the gas, hood of the motel sign fading behind me, and wondered if I'd ever know where the real danger lay. Inside that room, or in the voice I thought was my own. And as the rain finally began to fall, a light tap at my window made me jerk the car to a stop. Someone, or something, was out there. I punched out a slow breath against the humid night air, the memory of that neon dive still burning at the back of my skull. The rusted spur smelled of stale beer and broken dreams. Every inch of its sticky bar top a thumbprint of desperation. I'd been Mike Reynolds long enough to remember how my own name sounded, like a borrowed set of clothes that never quite fit. But tonight, I needed the misfit to hold. I ordered that black coffee, no cream, no sugar, watched Lurch slide it over with a nod that could have been sympathy or suspicion. He wiped the counter with a rag that had seen more violence than clean surfaces. I liked that. I liked that his eyes darted every time someone left the corner booth. My wire recorder nestled in the glove compartment of my rented Hyundai, but here my holster trembled with the same mechanical promise: record everything, betray nothing. By 2:03 a.m., Reyes glided through the door. I saw the gold chain under his hoodie catch the flicker of the jukebox light, and just for a heartbeat, he was a mirage, half angel, half threat. He slid onto the stool 2 away, didn't order. I kept my posture casual, thumb brushing the cash in my pocket. Time slowed. Outside, a dog barked, distant, lonely, like a warning siren. He turned. His gaze was an inspection light tracing every seam of my cover. "What you drinking, man?" I croaked, voice rougher than intended. He narrowed his eyes. When he spoke, his accent was low, practiced. "Name's Reyes." No invitation, but he stayed. I let silence do the work. I slid a crisp 100 across. "Word is, you move product." I let the words float between us. The jukebox spat a warped country riff that sounded like a slab of rust scraping metal. I felt my pulse knock against my ribs as the entire bar held its breath. Reyes caught the bill, slipped it into his pocket with slow deliberation. "Maplewood Motel," he said, a voice soft enough to fracture glass. "Room 12, 3 minutes past 3. Come alone." It sounded almost polite. I nodded once. My chair screeched across the floor. Attention snapped back. I caught the bartender's eye, cocked a brow that said, "Get ready." Lurch simply shrugged. Hesitation tasted like copper in my mouth. I drained the last of my coffee, the acrid tang clinging to my throat like regret. I stepped outside. The night welcomed me with a warm coil of air, heavy and expectant. My Hyundai awaited, dashboard clock glowing. 2:07 a.m. I pulled out onto the empty road, rain spatters beginning to dot the windshield. 20 minutes later, the Maplewood Motel loomed, its red neon sign sputtering in rhythm with my own heartbeat. Vacancy blinked at me like a dare. The lot was deserted, save for one crooked pickup and a flickering porch light over the office. I parked under the yellow glow and killed the engine. Silence pressed in until my ears rang. I approached room 12 on tiptoe, cash burning through my coat. The hallway smelled of damp carpet and mildew. Each door wore its own scarred history. Scratches, stickers peeling, muffled sobs seeping through cracks. I knocked twice, tap tap, deliberate. No answer. I knocked again, palm flat. My knuckles throbbed in the hush. Then the latch clicked. The door creaked open, revealing a woman's face framed by frightened eyes. Her cheeks were hollow, makeup smeared like tears. She blinked at me, as if seeing a ghost. Behind her, the room was bare. No couch, no table, only a single folding chair tipped on its side, and the soft hum of a neon clock on the wall. "Reyes!" I hissed, stepping inside. My boot scuffed the threadbare carpet. She froze, mouth parting. "Officer?" Her voice trembled. "He said he'd be back. He said..." Her words cracked. She slid the duffel bag toward me. The zipper was half open, exposing nothing but darkness. My instincts screamed. This wasn't a drug deal, it was a setup. I placed my hand on the bag handle and felt that thrum of anxiety in my bones. "You all right?" I asked, voice steadier than I felt. She shook her head, hair whipping across her face. He said he'd never leave me here. Before I could ask more, the hallway light flickered and died. The room plunged into a flat, suffocating black. My hand left the bag, groped for my flashlight. I clicked it on. The beam skittered across the walls, landing on nothing but peeling wallpaper. When I swung back, she was gone. Room 12's door stood closed, tight. I bit back a curse and shook the flashlight, hoping for batteries. Instead, my radio crackled. "Reynolds, you copy?" The voice was my own, or so I thought. My blood ran cold. "Dispatch, status?" I pressed the mic. Silence. Then that voice again, clipped and hollow. "You should never have come alone." My hand went to the doorknob. I yanked it open, dark hallway, no footprints, no sobs, just emptiness humming with menace. I stepped out, each footfall loud. At the far end, the office sign buzzed, casting deeper shadows. I scanned for a phone or an open door. Nothing moved. Then, tap. A light rap on the window of my car. I spun, heart hammering. Through the rain-misted glass I saw a figure, hunched, eyes glinting. My reflection flickered beside it. Two versions of me watching, one real, one not. I sprinted to the driver's side, yanked the door open, dove in. I slammed it shut and locked the doors. Rain pelted the roof like staccato bullets. My hands shook on the wheel. I turned the key, engine roared to life, tires squealed on gravel. As I peeled away, neon sign growing smaller. My radio burst with static. Then that whisper, "You're halfway to nowhere." I pressed my back to the seat, panting. Ahead, the black road stretched into gloom, rain streaking the windshield. Behind me, in the rear view, the motel sign blinked out. I didn't look back. But I'll never forget the way those eyes burned through the glass. Someone, or something, was out there. I barely registered the rain pounding the roof as I barreled onto the highway, headlights cutting through sheets of wet darkness. My knuckles were white on the wheel. Every mile marker rolled past faster than the last, as if the road itself were trying to outrun whatever had snuck up on me in that room. I flicked the wipers, slow, juddering swipes that looked more like seizures than a clearing of the windshield. In the rearview mirror, the strip of road behind me glowed dimly. The motel sign, blank now, had vanished into the night. But the image clung to my mind. That silhouette on the balcony, the way it froze under the stub of neon. I tried to focus on the road ahead. 2 lanes, a broken yellow line, but my vision blurred every time the flash of passing reflector posts hammered my eyes. By the time I hit the county line exit, I realized my coffee was gone cold. I reached down, found the styrofoam cup crushed in my coat pocket, its contents spilled into the lining. I tossed it in the back seat, no point leaving evidence of hesitation. My radio sat dead, mic clipped to my dash like a mute witness. I tapped the button. Nothing. Static. Then silence so profound my own heartbeat sounded like a freight train. I slowed as I merged back onto the main road leading to the station. Around me, the world was a canvas of steely black, glimmering with rain. Every reflective surface, street signs, puddles, the chrome grille of the occasional passing tractor-trailer, seemed to turn and watch. I felt like a baby in headlights, except the predator was in my car. 10 minutes later, I rolled into the station lot. The glow from the windows was muted, no call lights on. Someone must have left early, must have taken a break. I left the engine running, popped the door open, and stepped into the squall. The cool air hit my face, and I realized I hadn't felt anything but adrenaline for so long my limbs trembled at the cold. I should call it in. I should tell them what happened. But my voice stuck in my throat. Who'd believe a missing dealer, a vanished witness, and a phantom on my tail? I crossed the parking lot quickly, boots slipping on the soaked asphalt, and pushed through the locked door, only to find a single duty desk lamp on. Papers lay scattered on the counter. Morning shift had gone hours ago. I cleared my throat. Mike Reynolds, badge 4473, I said, voice echoing off the linoleum. I need to file a report. No one stirred. I sighed and dumped my soaked coat over the desk lamp, steam rising where it touched the bulb. The radio mic crackled once, faintly. Reynolds, then cut. I froze. That was my voice again. I'd tangled myself in my own cover so deep the line between Mike Reynolds and Detective Holt was a frayed cord. I tapped the speaker. "Dispatch, this is Reynolds. Please respond." Static, then a flicker. A man's voice, but not mine. "You can't hide in the dark." My heart seized. My own station, my supposed lifeline, was speaking lies. I slammed my palm on the desk. The lamp teetered, threatening to crash, but held. In the reflection of the darkened window behind the desk, I saw movement, a shape slinking along the exterior wall. I stepped forward, squinting, but it vanished when the lamp flickered again. I forced myself to breathe. I was tough enough to handle a few hooded couriers and broken motel rooms, but this was an intrusion into everything I trusted. I grabbed the mic again. "Reynolds to dispatch. Status check." Silence swallowed me whole. I leaned forward, ear pressed to the speaker. The silence roared back. At that moment, I realized I wasn't alone in the station. The hairs on my neck prickled. I reached instinctively for my sidearm, a habit born of nights like this, but hesitated. The weapon felt foreign in my grip, like someone else's fear. Instead, I retraced my steps to the front door. My boots echoed in the foyer's emptiness. I grabbed the brass handle and turned, only to find the door locked, tight as a coffin lid. Panic rose, slow and insidious. I yanked at the handle. It didn't budge. Behind me, the overhead fluorescent flickered, casting fractured shadows across the walls. I felt breath on the back of my neck, but when I spun, there was nobody. Just the staccato hum of electricity. I pressed my ear to the door, listened for footsteps, whispers, anything. Only the rain's soft percussion outside. I took a shuddering breath and forced my shoulders back. If the world had gone mad, I'd still get out. I rounded the desk, searching for keys. Logbook dredged from my memory. The one place I always kept spares. I found them taped under the counter, cold and wet. I slipped the key into the lock, turned it. The door clicked open, and I bolted outside. The storm had picked up. Sheets of rain blurred the fluorescent station sign. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing but roiling darkness. I dove into my car and slammed the door. My coat and badge were soaked through, but my recorder was still hidden. The only thread of truth I had left. I twisted the key. Engine turned over, radio silent. As wheels spun on diesel-slick pavement, I realized the truth wasn't just out there in the shadows. It was inside me. The lies, the covers, the fractured identities I wore like skins had blurred together. The man I was hunting might already be walking behind me, or sitting beside me. Ahead, the road curved into the suburbs where familiar streetlights waited. Behind me, the static whisper lingered in my mind. "You can't hide in the dark." And I knew, in every hollow echo of that station, in every transient shape in my rearview mirror, my real enemy had been wearing my face all along. The low hum of the engine was the only assurance I had as I peeled off into the damp night, rain honing itself into tiny bullets against the windshield. Each drop pelted my skull in time with my heartbeat. I drove without thinking, trusting the road's gentle curve to guide me back to some semblance of safety. But safety had become a myth, like a dream you could never quite recall once dawn arrived. As I crossed into the older part of town, streetlights cast pale coronas that fizzed and died. I passed shuttered storefronts and empty porches, each one a silent witness to my unraveling. I flicked on the dome light for a split second, only to see my face in the rear view, eyes rimmed red, skin slick with rain, hair plastered to my forehead. I wasn't Mike Reynolds or Danny Sharp or Martin Cole. I was just Holt, Detective Holt, stripped of every alias until nothing remained but the man who'd chased ghosts too long. My phone lay on the passenger seat, screen dark. I thought about calling backup, reporting the static voices, the vanished witnesses, the motel that wasn't really there, but I couldn't trust my own words anymore. The line between real and counterfeit had vaporized. I glanced at the glove compartment where my wire recorder trembled against the latch. That little device, the one thing I'd planted so carefully, might be my only proof that this wasn't madness, that I hadn't imagined the whisper behind the mic. You can't hide in the dark. I steered toward the river road, the one that ran beside the old rail yard. Cold fog rose off the water in plumes, swirling like specters in the headlight beams. The tracks forked and rusted into infinity. Somewhere down here, Reyes's supplier was supposed to meet his buyers. I still didn't know what they were moving. Drugs, guns, something else entirely. But I knew one thing. Every operative in that network would recognize a broken-off detective trying to go legit. They'd know vulnerability smelled like blood in the water. By 3:45 a.m., I reached the rail yard's entry point, a chain-link gate dangling on one hinge. I killed the engine and listened. The wind whispered through the links, carrying a faint clatter, metal on metal, maybe a rail car swaying in the siding. I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and scanned for movement. My flashlight snapped awake, beam slicing through the fog. I saw a figure hunching by a freight container, its hood drawn up. "Reyes," I called, voice firm. No answer, just that metallic groan again, rhythm of a heartbeat out here in the open. I circled the container's corner, every muscle primed. And there he was, Reyes, kneeling over something on the ground. Rain washed over his back in rivulets. I flicked my light down, my breath caught in my throat. Spread beneath him was my recorder, its wire dangling like a lifeline snapped in two. The duffel bag lay next to it, open and empty. No drugs, no cash, nothing. I stepped closer, and Reyes looked up, face ashen. His gold chain glittered faintly in the beam. "Detective Holt," he whispered, using my real name for the first time. My hand dropped to my holster, but he raised a hand to stop me. "I'm sorry, they made me do it." "Who?" I demanded. The echo of distant train horns rolled through the yard. He swallowed, voice cracking. "The ones who created you." I blinked. "What the hell are you talking about?" He pointed to the recorder. "That's not a recorder, it's a beacon." Rain pelted the hood of my jacket as my chest tightened. "A beacon?" He nodded, eyes glinting wet. "They used your voice to lure me, to lure all of us. You think you were planting bugs on them, but they planted one in you." I stared. The cold seeped into my bones. "You don't make sense." He rose slowly, hands raised. "Think back. Every alias, every code name. You weren't infiltrating the Valencia crew. You were running straight into their trap. They fed you everything you needed because they already knew your face." My flashlight wavered as I sank to one knee, stunned. "They knew what?" He took a step forward, then stopped. "They knew your real name was Holt. They knew your wife, your daughter's birthday." His voice faltered. They watched you disappear into every cover until you forgot who you were." silence swallowed us. The only sound was the far-off scrape of metal against metal. My mind spun with the implications. The rusted spur, the Maplewood Motel, the silent station, every scenario meticulously crafted. Every whisper in the radio, every flicker of a neon sign designed to break me. I looked down at the recorder's shattered casing. A red LED blinked faintly, a heartbeat against the void. Reyes's lips trembled. That beacon calls them to you. You've been transmitting your location every step of the way. A sudden rush of anger flooded my limbs. I shoved Reyes back with more force than intended, sending him crashing into the container wall. He gasped, sliding down. I grabbed the recorder and yanked the mic loose. Blue sparks flashed as I crushed it under my boot, but it kept blinking, faint, defiant, as though powered by my own dread. I felt the yard grow smaller, the tracks bending inward like the rails of a lunatic asylum. I realized then that I wasn't hunting crooks. I was the quarry. Every alias, every persona had been a puppet string leading me deeper into a labyrinth of my own making. Reyes coughed on the gravel. He pressed a hand to his bleeding temple. "Go," he rasped. "Get out of here before they come." I hesitated, flashlight beam flicking across the chain-link fence. Through the fog, I saw headlights. A row of cars lining the track entrance. Figures emerged, stepping into the weak light. Faces hidden by hoods. Guns raised, pointing at me. I stood, rain soaking through my jacket, heart hammering so loud I thought they'd hear it too. I raised a hand, trembling, but didn't reach for my gun. There was nowhere to go. The ground beneath my boots felt rotted, like a trap door waiting to open. One of the hooded men stepped forward, voice low, mechanical. "Detective Holt." I blinked. His voice was mine. Every snarl of frustration, every weary rasp. My blood froze. The man lifted his hood, revealing my face. I stumbled backward, disbelief shredding my mind. Another hood fell. Again, my face. Dozens of them, all around. Weapons trained on the single man standing in their midst. I staggered, pressed back against the container. My heart throttled. Behind me, Reyes whispered, "This is who they really are." I forced my eyes to focus through the rain. Each man and woman was a version of me. Eyes haunted, jaw set, every feature identical. They were my ghosts given flesh. I saw myself in every trigger finger, every gun barrel. My flash of panic turned to recognition. I was the constant, the one variable they needed. They'd studied me, my mannerisms, my voice, my regrets. I had trained them unwittingly to become me. And now, they were ready to replace me. They took a collective step forward, synchronized like a nightmare come alive. My breath hitched. My mind screamed for escape, but my legs wouldn't move. Then, voice on the wind, a whisper drowned by the rain. "You can't hide in the dark." I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them, I saw them lifting their weapons, the barrels gleaming like accusing fingers. I raised a hand, voice strangled. "What do you want?" They answered only with the echo of my own silent scream. And as the train horn blared in the distance, the last thing I heard was my own whispered thought, pitched on the edge between hope and oblivion. Who am I, if not the monster I created?